Warning. Tongue and Geek contains heavy spoilers. If you haven't read, watched, or played the content being reviewed this episode, know that we will definitely spoil major plot points. Also, this show isn't for kids. We use words like and and it would take too much time and effort to edit them all out. Please don't tell our moms. Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to Tongue and Geek, where two more white guys on the internet give their unsolicited opinions on all things geeky. I'm Isaac.
I'm Tyler.
And today we're talking about The Suicide Squad, which is directed by James Gunn and is a standalone sequel to DC Films' 2016 Suicide Squad movie. Tyler, you want to give us some background on this one?
Okay, where to start with the background on this one? The first movie that came out in 2016, and I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody who is going to listen to this, it made a lot of money, but wasn't the best received movie of all time.
It's shit. It's shit.
Critics hated it, fans hated it. Yeah, it's not a good movie. So there was a lot riding on this one because I won't get into the nitty-gritty of it, but for a while there, James Gunn was fired from Guardians of the Galaxy 3. He, of course, was the writer-director of the first two, and Warner Brothers scooped him up and saw an opportunity because he had made two over at Marvel. So they're like, hey, you know what? He could be our guy. And according to him, they kind of gave him carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. They even offered him Superman at some point. And he's like, you know what? I want to do the Suicide Squad. So, lo and behold, we have the Suicide Squad. Everything that you would want to happen with this one happened. It is mostly beloved. Fans love it. Critics loved it. It's pretty much everything the first one could have been and should have been. You don't need the first one, like, at all. Like, if you're going to watch a Suicide Squad movie...
Totally skippable. There's no reason to watch the first one, and nothing that happened in the first one is important to the story of this one.
I don't want to step on the toes of the people who do like the first one, because,
I do,
I respect all fans of...
it's a bad movie.
Hey. Everybody's allowed to love whatever they want to love.
They are.
Such an ass. Anyway, because fans are so pedantic these days with geek property and nerd shit. Is it a sequel? Is it a reboot? Does it take place in the same continent? Yes. It like, just because it doesn't necessarily connect to the first one, it's still ostensibly a sequel. We have multiple characters from the first one with the same actors reprising the roles. And there's tiny little things that kind of connect it, like their interpersonal relationships, say between like Harley Quinn and Flag and Captain Boomerang, who all were together in the first one. Kind of, hints at the first one, but other than that, yeah, completely standalone. Do we want to start with recap, or do we just want to bury the lead and discuss how much we enjoyed it?
We should do a little recap first to give some details of like what the actual plot is. So it starts off, and we're following this character named Savant, I believe was his name. Was that the guy
Savant,
at the beginning?
Played by Michael Rooker.
Yes, we're following him, and like the first 15 minutes is like them assembling this new squad, like a whole new Suicide Squad. I'm terrible with names, Tyler, so go down the list of like the characters in that Suicide Squad during that first opening sequence.
Well, it's headed up by Amanda Waller, of course, who is the architect of the Suicide Squad, aka Task Force X.
Mm-hmm.
She's getting another team together. We kind of jump right into it. She gets Savant. It's a who's who of like obscure DC characters. Javelin. We got TDK, which stands for the Detectable Kid. Captain Boomerang, Blackguard, Mongal, who is the sister of Superman villain Mongol. Who else? Harley Quinn, of course. She's on that first team. And am I missing somebody?
You are. You're missing the best character.
Weasel!
Oh,
Good old Weasel.
He's just a gigantic weasel. Like, that's it. He's like a man weasel.
Big weasel.
Yeah.
A big, ugly weasel.
There's a great joke where everybody's trying to figure out what the fuck he is. They're like, is this a dog? Yeah, he looks like an Afghan hound or something. It's like, dude, is this a werewolf? They start freaking out. He's like, no, it's just a weasel.
Doesn't talk, just kind of
screams.
Sits there and
he just kind of screams.
And has googly eyes. And
yeah, he's really disturbing looking. Yeah, they're all led up by Lieutenant Rick Flag, yeah. He leads the team onto this beach. They're trying to get they're trying to go to like this South American island where there's like some research project going on and they need to destroy the facility and like get back some data that was important or whatever. So they get down onto the beach and the first thing that happens is that Weasel drowns because he could not swim and nobody bothered to check because they just dropped them into the middle of the ocean. Yeah. So one death down within the first 15 minutes. The rest of the team gets on shore and are immediately and hilariously gunned to death. Like, all of them except for Rick Flag and Harley Quinn die. And it's amazing. It sets the tone immediately.
Mm-hmm. Because you mentioned this after we watched it. So much of the marketing is revolved around this first team that you see. So you think they're gonna be most of the team. But
nope.
It's just this bait and switch for like, you know, the movie jumps right into it, like getting the team together, going on a mission, storming the beach, and they all just die in the most horrible, hilarious, brutal ways.
Yeah,
I knew
TDK. He detaches his arms and they get shot at, and like he's just writhing on the ground. Oh, it's so good.
Oh, God, there's so many hilarious visual gags in this first 15 minutes. I knew I was going to... I mean, I'm a big James Gunn fan in general.
Yeah.
And I laughed in the helicopter scene with the whole, like, is he a dog? He's a fucking werewolf? Oh, yeah. God, get me out of here. But, like, when Weasel jumps out of the plane and he immediately starts drowning, like,
oh, it's still
the
funny.
Soundtrack cuts out. Like, it's just him drowning. Oh, and everybody's like, what the fuck? He can't swim. And then, like, Savant goes to save him, drags him to the beach, checks his vitals. There's, like, a beat of silence. And then you just hear over the comms, the weasel's dead! The weasel's dead! I was already laughing my ass off.
It's such a good opening segment because it's such a bait and switch and it works so well. Like, if this was a more serious movie, it would piss people off so bad to be like, oh man, all these characters that we love and recognize are like suddenly dead and they just switched them out for these other ones. It's like, that's bullshit. But it's like, they chose the most D-list characters they could find and just threw them together for this quick gag at the beginning that sets the tone of like, yeah, this is a completely irreverent, hyper-violent movie where like anybody can die at any moment and it's not going to be tragic, it's going to be funny as hell. So like, it's great.
The tragedy comes later.
Yeah. Which isn't to say it's not heartfelt. We'll get to that, but like...
Oh, yeah. We'll definitely get to that.
But like, yeah, I love this opening segment. It's fantastic.
Speaking of the violence, I will say that I can see more casual viewers who aren't accustomed to this level of violence in comic book movies being turned off by it.
Oh, yeah. We'll get to that in review, because lots of people had that comment.
This isn't going to come out right away, but by the time somebody's listening to this and they haven't seen it, just be warned that it's really violent.
It's like, incredibly, very yes. Gory. It makes like, Deadpool look tame.
Oh, yeah. Deadpool's, both of them are completely tame compared to this.
Yeah.
You see, but it's a James Gunn movie, and if you're familiar with his earlier works, he got his, I'm going to flex my movie geek cred.
All right.
He got started in Troma Studios, and for horror movie and exploitation fans, you know what Troma is. It's America's oldest independent film studio and distributor. That's kind of their tagline. They specialize in low-budget, low-brow, shocking for the sake of it movies. And James Gunn's movie for Troma was Tromeo and Juliet, which is just a gross-out adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. And it's my favorite Troma movie. So I've been a fan of him ever since all the way back in the day. So he has a bunch of great horror movies to his credit, and then he got huge with the Guardians movies, and now he has another great comic book movie under his belt with the Suicide Squad.
This movie really feels like what Guardians would be if it was completely, like, off the chain. Like, if Marvel was just like, hey, do whatever you want, James Gunn. Like, this is definitely his, like, I have a lot more free reign to play it how I want. It's basically, if you took the sort of, like, style and family narrative, like, themes of the Guardians movies and pair it with, like, the hyperviolence and irreverence of a Deadpool film.
Yeah.
That's basically what this movie is.
And that's not to say it doesn't have its own identity, because it totally does.
No, it does, but, like, you definitely feel the James Gunn influence here. Like, you can tell, like, the same guy who made Guardians made this, but he's pushing things way further.
And it's honestly shocking they let him get away with what he gets away with.
Yeah.
Here. Like, when it was rated R, when it was confirmed R, I'm like, oh, cool, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I expected it to have a level of, gore and violence, but I honestly wasn't expecting this much.
Yeah, you see a guy get ripped in half. You see, like...
Splattered, yeah.
Yeah, you see, like,
so much splatter and limbs and just...
entrails. There's like a whole scene where they're walking through like this lab where all these people have been tortured, and you see like their severed limbs and like their faces ripped off and like all this horrific shit. And it doesn't just like pan over it either. Like, it takes the time to show you, like, it gets brutal in some places. And I was grossed out a bit, and I have a pretty strong stomach for that kind of stuff, but it was like, ugh.
Yeah, it's pretty hardcore. It's not as hardcore as, say, something like Invincible was.
No.
I mean, if Invincible, because Invincible was animated, it could go like completely nuts. But like, if Invincible was live action, that would be like rated X. It would.
Well, that and
it's not quite at that level, but it's definitely crazy.
This is sort of a tangent too. It's like gore is very different depending on the tone that you put to it. With this movie, it's like cartoonishly gory. Like, it's meant to be, like, over-the-top gory, and because of that, even when it's, like, at its most disturbing, it's still, like, layer of, unrealism attached to it. But with, like, a series like Invincible, even though it's animated, like, the gore in that is meant to be tragic and shocking and horrifying. So, like, even if it's, like, the same amount of gore, like, the tone attached to that, like, gore makes it so much more powerful, whereas here it's like, even though there's a lot of stuff that you're gonna see that's gonna gross you out, it's more like, but the tone here is that it's supposed to be like a wacky, over the top, violent kind of movie.
Mm-hmm. I guess we've talked enough about the gore, so we should probably
let's move on,
get into the meat of the movie proper.
Speaking of gore, meat. So anyway, Task Force X Squad 1 dies, but it turns out that they were just a diversion for Task Force X Squad 2, which is headed up by Deathstroke. Deadshot. Bloodsport.
Oh, you're doing a bit. Okay, I didn't know you were doing it.
Yeah, it's another guy who's super good at martial arts and every weapon known to man, which they play off that.
They do. They poke fun at it.
Yeah, it's like, when you first see it, you're like, oh god, another one of these. But like, they make fun of it, and it works well. So you have Bloodsport, you have Peacemaker, who is another guy who is super good with weapons and martial arts and all that stuff. You have Ratcatcher 2, daughter of Ratcatcher, and her power is that she can summon rats, which is horrifying. You have King Shark, who fucking steals the show, Baby Protect, and Polka Dot Man, who is also another great character who just makes these polka dots that like disintegrate anything they touch.
Pretty much every character on the main squad steals the movie at some point.
Yeah.
Let me flex my comic book cred too after I got done flexing my
It's a DC movie. You're allowed to flex. These are your flex moments.
Well, what makes the concept of the Suicide Squad so appealing is that, the whole concept itself, like, we'll take these obscure villains, these second tier, third tier, sometimes even fourth tier villains, and put them on a team together and have them do the dirty missions nobody else wants to do. James Gunn, he's a big fan, obviously. The run that really put the team on the map was by John Ostrander in the 80s and into the 90s. Mm-hmm. And Gunn said that he saw this as sort of almost a continuation of that run and not just an adaptation. So I really love how he just went crazy with it and is like, you know what? I'm not going to just adapt a team from the comics. I'm going to pick, in the spirit of the comics, I'm going to pick whoever I want, just cherry pick, and match them together.
Is this James Gunn's fanfic for the Suicide Squad?
I guess you can call it that.
Is every film adaptation of a comic book just an elaborate corporate fan fiction? Is that all that separates fan fiction from like adaptations? Is the amount of money that goes into them?
Is corporate licensing and all that stuff?
Oh
Probably.
My God.
I mean, maybe.
I just broke it open. Nothing separates the fanfic writers from the professionals. It's all just a thin veneer.
Yeah, this is James Gunn fan fiction squad, because this squad does not exist in this form in any of the comics.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think some of them have ever actually been on the team, and all of them, except for of course Harley Quinn and Rick Flag, who's a constant throughout the comic.
Mm-hmm.
All of them are basically footnotes in DC's history. They don't have a lot of appearances. They don't have much history.
Peacemaker was like from the fucking like 40s or something, wasn't he? He had
Peacemaker wasn't originally a DC character. He was from a long defunct company called Charlton Comics. The Charlton characters were bought by DC back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So that includes characters like Peacemaker and Blue Beetle and characters like that. And he had a brief stint of popularity in Charlton. And when DC bought him, they released a couple of very, very short runs of like 4-6 issues each. And then he just kind of disappeared for a long time. He showed up in a Grant Morrison comic and a non-continuity comic called Multiversity. And I can't think of anything else significant until this movie. So James Gunn's really hitting those deep cuts with his roster here.
Peacemaker's played by John Cena, by the way. Just throwing that out there.
In his best role to date.
Yeah, surprisingly good role by John Cena.
And Bloodsport played by Idris Elba.
Of course, always great.
Yep, just a beefy, sexy smoke show of a man. Everybody has made this comparison already. Yeah, you can kind of tell the role was originally meant for Deadshot, Will Smith's character. But I don't know specifically because I haven't looked it up myself. But I'm pretty sure they did want Deadshot again, and Will Smith had scheduling conflicts, so they brought Idris Elba in. And he's Bloodsport, which he kind of has the same power set abilities as Deadshot.
Yeah, exactly the same. Is a guy good with every possible weapon and is trained in martial arts. He's
basically a better version of Deadshot. And even though you can be like, oh, I guess that could have been Will Smith, it doesn't matter because he's a better character as written and performed. originally in the comics, he was a Superman villain in the 80s. Again, not many appearances. I could give his brief backstory. Why not? In the comics, he's way more unhinged. He has this backstory of, the Vietnam War. He was actually kind of a coward, didn't want to do it, but his brother went, and his brother, lost all of his limbs. And he, went all crazy, and Lex Luthor hired him, to use him as a weapon against Superman, shoots him with a kryptonite bullet, which they reference in the movie, which is a cool little nod. And then we have Ratcatcher 2, which is really interesting.
She's the heart of this movie. She's like the emotional core.
Yes. One of the 5 beating hearts of this movie. She is technically an original character because in the comics, there's only Ratcatcher and he's a Batman villain. So I have to applaud James Gunn for, you know how comic book fans can be. What? You're making beloved Batman villain Ratcatcher into the daughter and a female, but that didn't quite happen. At least I didn't see it.
Is Ratcatcher beloved?
No, he's not beloved. I was being facetious.
That's what I'm saying. That's part of the point I wanted to make is that, what's so great about this movie and what's so great about the fact that James Gunn has such free reign here is that, a cool thing about a superhero movie that takes, like, the D-list characters is that there's so much more freedom to play with them. When you have a movie with Superman or Batman or Spider-Man or an established character that everyone immediately recognizes and they know, like, their major story arcs, like, you're constrained. You have to follow certain story beats, and if you deviate from them, the fans will eat you alive. Like, and that also means that, like, hey, also, we've got to do this balancing act between, oh, we can't just tell the same damn story over and over and over again, and hey, we can't deviate too far from the norm, or the fans will call it, like, a misrepresentation of character and everything. When you've got these D-list characters that hardly anybody in the mainstream has heard about, and even the people who do know them, like, really don't think of them as, like, super duper important to anything. Like, you have so much more free reign to, like, reinvent them as something unique and interesting and powerful standing on their own instead of as part of this larger narrative that's been going on for decades. So, like, you get this story with this version of the Suicide Squad that, like, yeah, is made up of a bunch of characters that maybe people don't really recognize or care about, excluding Harley Quinn, because she's, like, the most recognizable DC villain ever, except for the Joker himself at this point. But, like, you have so much more room where you can, like, take these characters that have been around for so long but have been either misused or not used at all and find new ways of exploring what they can say about superheroes and just the world at large.
Yeah, it's something James Gunn is good at, because he did it over at Marvel with the Guardians.
Yeah, because nobody gave a fuck about the Guardians before the movies came out. There was, like, such a small following of the Guardians. Not even
comic readers really, like, knew about the Guardians or read the Guardians beforehand. And now they're, like, as big as anybody.
Yeah. They're Space Avengers. They're like their own Avengers team in space that everybody recognizes. I still can't believe that those movies got greenlit. Like, I'm amazed that the Guardians movies got made at Marvel.
Yeah, but they
did, and they're amazing.
And to think they almost threw it all away.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, if they didn't fire James Gunn for a hot minute, we wouldn't have gotten this movie. So it all worked out in the end. And he's back making Guardians 3, so it all works out. Rat Character 2, we went off on a tangent there.
Sorry.
Yeah, she is one of the parts of the movie. She's played by newcomer, God, I hope I don't butcher her name, Daniela Melchior? Is that how you would pronounce it?
I don't have her name pulled up, so I couldn't tell you. Let me look.
Anyway, she is very charming, and you can tell that she's the character that shouldn't be here. Like,
oh yeah.
You question until she gives her backstory. You question, like, why she's even in prison in the first place. She's got a good heart. She has a cute character quirk where, like, she's just perpetually sleepy.
Mm-hmm. My theory is that she has the fucking plague from all the rats.
And there's also the darker theory that we're kind of jumping ahead here, but her father was a heroin addict.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, perpetual sleepiness is kind of a symptom of withdrawal and coming off of heroin. So maybe she was also a heroin addict for a time.
Quite possible.
So she is, okay, we got, all we got is Polka Dot Man and King Shark. We'll save the King Shark later. Polka Dot Man, right. Everybody's loving Polka Dot Man too. Played by another guy whose name is hard to pronounce, David Dastmalchian. He's kind of everywhere lately. He's a kind of a chameleon character actor. He's been in The Dark Knight. He's been in Ant-Man. He's been in all kinds of big movies in these small roles, and this is kind of a breakout for him. He's hilarious. Polka Dot Man's another Batman villain. His whole gimmick was obviously polka dots. He's this kind of hangdog, woebegone, just miserable kind of dude.
There's a point where they're just like, we're all gonna die on this mission. He's like, I hope so. And it's like, yep. This is the character they're going with. And his backstory's so fucking funny, tragic. It's so funny, tragic.
The running gag with his mother is one of my favorite jokes in the whole movie.
So, like, the story is that his mother wanted to create superheroes, so she experimented on him and his siblings, and I think all of his siblings died, but he survived and killed his mother, and now he just sees her everywhere. So multiple times throughout the movie, you'll see, like, bad guys turn into, like, his mother. You'll see, like, even the squad members will turn into his mother. And it's not just, like, his regular mother. It's, like, CGI'd version of her to be, like, multiple sizes and shapes and everything. And it's fucking hilarious.
It's a hilarious sight gag, and it works every time they use it. Mm-hmm. They use it, like, 3 or 4 times in the movie. It's a great reveal because he's laying out his backstory, and it's tragic. Mm-hmm. Because the comic version, it's just his polka dots are just tech, basically. It's just, haha, this one explodes, or this one does this. Mm-hmm. But this one has an element of body horror. It's an interdimensional virus. So he gets these brightly rainbow-colored legions that just grow, and they're like tumors that just grow in his body. And he has to expel them twice a day, or else it's going to kill him. And they come out as polka dots.
And they burn anything they touch. Just melt it to ash.
It's such a great gag.
Yeah.
He's laying out his backstory, and one of the other team members asks, like, where is your mother? And it's a close-up of his face, and he's like, everywhere. And it cuts to the rest of the team, and it's just they're all his mom.
And the King Shark one in the back is just like looking at a butterfly, and it's like this big fat gray version of his mother, and it's so fucking funny.
Polka Dot Man's another MVP, and then we get to the MVP of MVPs for me. It may vary depending on the viewer. King Shark.
King Shark.
King Shark is a shark. Voiced by Sylvester Stallone, and motion capture performed by Steve Agee. I think is that how you say his name?
I don't know.
Who was also the bespectacled guy in the control room with Waller and all of them.
Okay, yeah. The bigger guy with the beard.
Yep, that guy.
Cool.
I love King Shark. Any iteration, any version, because he's a big walking, talking shark.
It's weird stepping off of like the Harley Quinn animated series version of King Shark, where he's like sort of just a regular dude with like a normal emotions and thoughts and everything, who occasionally breaks out into violence, to this version, which is more of like the simpleton, childlike version who only knows a few words and still breaks out into bursts of violence every now and then. But like, it's a great version of that trope.
It is.
I will say, pisses me off a little bit, because Thor motherfucking Ragnarok, you had the Incredible Hulk, who is literally the icon of this goddamn trope of violent, simpleton, childlike character, and you had the opportunity to make a funny and heartwarming version of that character, and you fucked it up! Here's Suicide Squad, where they have a fucking shark man, and that's not even necessarily his actual character traits in the comics, and they pulled it off beautifully, but you have the goddamn Hulk, the most iconic version of this trope, and you fuck it up!
Which is funny, because Taika Waititi wrote and directed Ragnarok, and Taika Waititi plays the Ratcatcher 2's father.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if he thought that on set at some point.
No, he didn't. He was like, I did such a good job with that. One of these days, we're gonna review some of his movies that we actually like. I don't want it to sound like we fucking hate Taika Waititi.
He's great.
Wonderful director. He has a lot of fantastic movies. Fucking hate Ragnarok. Anyway, I don't mean to bring that dead horse to beat into our review for Suicide Squad, so let's go on.
I could just make this the King Shark episode, but I've loved sharks since I was a kid, so you throw me a comic book character that's a walking, talking shark. He could be the almost mindless killer aggressive type, which he's been. He could be smart and intelligent like he is in the Harley Quinn show, or he could be kind of like the simpleton, lovable version like he is in this, and I'll love all of it. In the comics, when he first joined the Suicide Squad. Yeah. Well, no, not first. He first appeared as a Superboy villain in the 90s. Huh. So he's a 90s creation.
Oh boy.
No, it's not bad. He's kind of basically the generic kind of monster in that at first.
He didn't wear sunglasses and like Hawaii patterned shorts.
No,
like
but
surf into battle.
But he has a really cool tattoo. I don't want to sound stupid. The term's not coming to me, but the Hawaiian tattoos, what are those called?
Tribal?
Yeah. He has a cool tribal tattoo on one of his arms.
Ah.
And in the Superboy comic, he is reluctantly recruited onto a Suicide Squad mission for a couple issues. And then in the New 52, he's a full-time member, and in that he's a hammerhead, which is cool. And James Gunn said they wanted to do the hammerhead at first, but it didn't seem. It was just too logistically tough because, how the hammerhead's eyes are just...
Yeah, that's hard to
2 feet apart and pointing in the opposite directions. So, but I'm glad they went with the standard kind of great white look because it's
adorable.
It's the cute factor, bro.
It really is. I never thought I'd look at a shark and be like, hey, that's a cute creature. It's a fucking adorable watching King Shark. Whenever he's not mauling and eating people whole, like, he's so cute. Adorable. He does, like, don't get me wrong, he's terrifying when he swallows a man whole at one point, but, like, he's just, like, got these big, gigantic eyes that are just, like, looking around at people, and even though he's got that mouthful of sharp teeth, it's always kind of, like, slightly agape and, like, kind of, like, dullard looking. Like, he is that cute, stupid look, and it's so great.
James Gunn is just so good at doing a lot with a little, because King Shark doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but you get so endeared to him so quickly. When the main team is on the beach and they're heading toward their destination, they're camping out for the night. Bloodsport wakes up in time to see King Shark about to eat Ratcatcher 2 while she's dead-ass asleep. He shoots him a bunch of times to back him off, and the whole squad's like, what do we do with him? Like, do we kill him? Like, we can't have him eating our team members, like some sort of wild card. Waller's like, no, you need him. He's your strongest member. Ratcatcher, being the sweetheart that she is, she starts to befriend him. And it's such a I'm going to cry. She kneels down next to him, and she's like, do you want to be our friends? Would you eat your friends? And just, there's this, the way it's performed and the special effects are so good. Like, you can see King Shark thinking, like, he's not mindless. He's not mindless. He's like, he's thinking about it, and he's like, I don't have any friends.
He has no friends.
And like, it's not an overly sappy moment. Like, he's not saying it in a woe is me kind of way.
It's very, like, matter of fact the way he says it. Like,
yeah, and it's just like, oh, baby. And she's like, well, we can be friends from now on. And it's just like, yes, be their friends. Throughout the movie.
She has a great line, though, and I don't remember it. I'm going to paraphrase, but it's so beautiful, where, like, Bloodsport calls her out. He's like, this is a stupid-ass idea, and she's like, it would not be a mistake to die believing in love.
Gambled on love. Yeah, or something like that.
It's so beautiful for a fucking Suicide Squad movie. Like, it's such a beautiful line to exist here.
Just throughout the movie, occasionally it just takes little moments to kind of just check in on King Shark and what he's doing. Later on, they're like driving in the van, and he's just peeking out the window, just like observing life around him. And like, again, it's so understated, but like, it tugs on your heartstrings because like, you can just see that he's like absorbing all this, and he's like enjoying it, and he's curious.
There's a scene where they go into a bar and like all of them are dancing and just enjoying like possibly their last night alive, and King Shark has to stay in the van because, he's a gigantic shark man and nobody can see him, and you just hear him, like, he's just listening to the music coming from inside the building, and he's like slowly nodding his head, and it's this mix of adorable and horribly sad because it's just like, he's stuck alone in the van by himself, let him in to dance.
What makes that work so well is that he wants to be with them, because when they're getting ready beforehand, they're like, what are we going to do with him? He's like, I could be in a disguise.
Yeah, he's like, I'll wear a disguise.
Fake mustache. They're like, no, it's not going to work. And he puts his little thin finger up, and they're like, you still look exactly the way you look.
He goes, fuck.
Fuck. And he just storms away. And he loves eating people. He loves nom-noms.
Yes, he loves his nom-noms. He eats people multiple times throughout the movie.
I guess we're just run through his whole sort of trajectory here from the beginning and the end of the movie, and then we'll get to everybody else.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, should we backtrack and do some more recap, or are we going to just finish up King Shark real quick?
We're already down that road.
All right, let's finish up King Shark, and we'll backtrack a bit.
Seeing him eat people is fucking awesome and fun.
Yeah.
But my favorite part, probably my favorite, could be my favorite. There's so many great scenes that could be my favorite scene. But one of my favorite scenes, there's this kind of this like running sort of thing where like when the team's like in the moment, they kind of sort of forget about him and like they'll leave him behind. So in the third act, when they're getting ready to do what they came there to do, they're all going off in separate directions, and all of a sudden King Shark's just left alone.
Mm-hmm.
So he's wandering himself in, it's called Jotunheim, the place where they needed to be.
Yeah.
And he comes across this room that's an aquarium. And like this beautiful score kicks in, and these weird jellyfish things start swimming toward him. And like, he's like, oh my God, like, what are these things?
Some new friends.
He says, dumb new friends. And they take his shape, they outline his shape with their little bodies, and they're playing. And he's so happy. He found friends. And you're just like, oh, that's so cute and so sweet. It's another like tear moment. And then later, as Jotunheim's exploding because they're in there to blow it up, the room they're in floods, and the jellyfish are there, and like, oh, his friends are okay. And then they turn vicious, and then they start attacking him. And you're like, oh.
Such a good. My exact reaction was like the aquarium blows up. I'm like, no, his new friends. He just made those friends, and then like you see them swimming around him, and he's like, oh, they're okay. And then they just turn around and start eating him, and it's like, oh fuck, no. Why? I was so on edge this entire third act. Mm-hmm.
Because the movie does a good job of making you care about these characters, and because the movie offs some of them, you're like, who's going to be next? There's a genuine sense of tension, like, who's going to die?
Yes.
So King Shark's being attacked by these jellyfish, and he falls out of this building that like 100 or more feet to the ground. And you're like, oh God, did that kill him? No, please don't tell me he's dead. But then the bad guys, the military, start shooting him. He's still alive. And I'm like, stop hurting my boy.
Yeah.
Like, leave him alone.
That's a great point to jump back on, is that like this movie, a lot of superhero movies, you know, going in, like nobody's major is going to die. Or if they are, it's like going to be a huge event movie, like in Avengers, Infinity War, Endgame and stuff like that. Like, you know who's going to die, because those movies have been built up to. With this one, it's like, these are D-list villains and characters from DC's lineup. Any of them are expendable. And it works perfectly for a Suicide Squad movie where characters are supposed to be expendable. You're supposed to see characters on this team dying frequently because, like, yeah, that's how the Suicide Squad works. They're not supposed to be, like, immortal, unstoppable paragon of virtue or anything. They're a bunch of assholes who got thrown in to do a dirty job the regular superheroes won't do, and if they don't do their job right, they'll get killed. Yeah,
it lives up to the title, which it's a good thing. It's good that you mention, like, with other superhero movies, you don't, 99% of the time, you know they're not going to die.
You know that Spider-Man's not going to die. Yeah. You know Spider-Man won't die in a Spider-Man film. Like,
and depending on the movie, you would already expect going into the movie that somebody's going to die, like Logan or Endgame. You know, like with Endgame, like, all right, somebody's going to die in Endgame. You already know, so you can kind of prepare yourself beforehand.
Everyone knew going into Endgame that Cap and Tony would die or at least retire in some form. Like, we all knew those two were not coming out. Like, they were not coming out of this movie.
And not to knock the movie.
No, I love Endgame.
Yeah, and Tony's death is very effective. But
yes.
There's that built-in expectation because it's a big finale that not all of them are going to make it. But with something like this, characters you don't know, like, I'm reiterating your point. I don't need to do that.
Their deaths aren't glorious here. It's not like the finale of a character arc. It's like their deaths are meaningless and trivial, and that works great for the tone of this film. And
just the fact that you care so much. Like, every one of them, everyone that happened, well, except for the beginning.
Except for the beginning, where it sets... That's the thing, is like the beginning sets up this tone, is like, we're gonna have this irreverent, like, violent, hyper fun movie that's all just about, like, anybody can die at any moment. And that's great. It sets the tone of like, this can be wacky hyper violence and everything, and we don't have to get too attached. But then the movie forces you to get attached to these characters anyway, and now it's like, fuck. I know that this is a movie where anyone can die, so who's going to die?
Yeah, and the fact that I felt that sense of tension in a superhero movie third act is kind of a small miracle in and of itself.
Yeah.
Because we've had so many superhero movies this past 12 years or so. Even the great ones with good third acts, like, it still feels kind of like, okay, this is the third act action scene.
Yeah.
You know? But with this one, it's so well structured. and it did the legwork in making you get invested in the characters that you like. It sucks you in on a deeper level than your standard third act superhero action scene.
Well, it deviates from the formula is its biggest strength, is that, like, even though you can tell this is a James Gunn movie and it has a lot of his themes of, like, found family underlying this, like, goofy adventure where wacky comic book hijinks are happening, like, it still deviates from the formula because it's like, when we watched Guardians 1 and 2, we weren't really that worried that, like, any of the members of the Guardians were going to die. Guardians 2 did have Yondu die at the end, but, like, that wasn't too big of a loss because A, he was a villain in the first movie, and B, his presence in the second movie, while important to it, was also, like, a dramatic death that was meant to be, like, heartfelt and meaningful. Whereas here, we establish early on that, like, death is something that happens everywhere to anyone, and no one is safe from it, and it's hilarious, and then suddenly it's not so funny when we are attached to these characters now. So, like, the fact that it can set up, like, hey, this is a goofy, hyper-violent action movie, but also you're going to really feel bad if this character you've come to love dies.
So, should we hop back into what the movie is actually about?
Let's actually talk about the plot a bit, and we need to go through some of the other characters, because, God, we just talked about King Shark for a long time. We're done with King Shark. He's great. We all love him. He's baby, protect, attack, all that stuff. Going back, so Team 2, which we talked about who the members of that are, they are going to Jotunheim to blow it up, get rid of the evidence of whatever the thing is that they're looking for. Along the way, they reunite with Rick Flag, and they help. There's this little side story about the rebels on this island wanting to take back control of this, like, regime that was overthrown. It's not really that important. It's just kind of like a background plot contrivance to be like, hey, here's some other people and here's some things going on. They do a great bit where, like, Peacemaker and Bloodsport are going through, like, the camp of these rebels and, like, killing all of them because they think that they're, like, the evil regime that's taken over the island, and they're just killing all of these rebels, and then they get to, like, the leader's tent, and they see Rick Flag there, like, discussing, like, okay, we'll help you out if you will help us get to Jotunheim, and it's like, we're allies now, and then they're just like, why didn't my men alert me that you all were coming? It's like, I don't know, they were dead when we got here. It's just like, they just slaughtered us.
It's all like, ooh, we didn't see anybody.
And they kill so many people along the way.
And it's a hilarious scene because the payoff is hilarious, and also because it's just a dick measuring contest between Bloodsport and Peacemaker.
Yes,
because they're both a badass, marksmen, good with any weapon in their hand. And the scene escalates, they're just taking people out, and then they start sizing each other up and trying to one up each other with how, like, nonchalantly and coolly they can take out the bad guys.
Yeah, how many crazy weapons they both have. Let's talk about Peacemaker for a minute. I want to talk about Peacemaker's story, or his character arc, because I think he's a really fascinating addition to this cast. All of these other characters are basically, like, if we were to do the alignment chart, they fall on either chaotic neutral or chaotic evil. Like, they're all just a bunch of bad guys who are just, like, super don't give a fuck about, like, any of, like, the rules. With Peacemaker, he is very much lawful evil. Like, he is, like, a super duper hyper patriot who believes above all else in, like, fulfilling the mission and protecting, like, peace at any cost. Specifically, like, the American notion of peace. And to have him alongside all these characters is both hilarious, because, like, you get to see him, like, rationalizing how hyper absolutely violent he's being, as, like, oh, I'd kill any man, woman, or child to maintain peace, But also, it's, like, incredibly powerful and terrifying, because throughout this whole thing, like, you're seeing these characters starting to bond, starting to form family. Like, there's that whole found family trope that's, like, central to the themes of this film. And then you get to the point where they get to Jotunheim, and this is skipping a bit ahead. We're just going to skip around the plot at this point. But they get to Jotunheim, and they find out that the American government was responsible for all of these horrible experiments that have been going on. And Rick Flag is basically like, I didn't go to fucking war for this country for this shit. I'm going to take this back and show everyone, like, all the horrible shit that the American government did. And Peacemaker is like, I can't let you do that. I respect you. I think you're a hero, but I will not let you do that. And he and Rick Flag get in this huge fucking fight that's dirty, down and gritty brawl, and he fucking kills Rick Flag. And then he's about to kill Ratcatcher too because she tries to get the data. It's, I don't know necessarily if I'd call it heartbreaking, but it's like an incredibly powerful emotional arc for him because like you see this character and you understand why he does the things he does, and you don't necessarily hate him for it. Like he is in the wrong. He is being a bastard, but like you've seen him be this.
A lot of fans hate him.
Do they? Do they?
Yeah. They hate him for killing Flag because Flag was such a no-show in the first one. He was just a nothing character, and in this one he's likable, so everybody hated that Flag bit the bullet by Peacemaker.
Well, I can't hate him because he's so well done. Like, he is in the wrong. He is a bastard who's following, like, the law to the extreme of the letter of being
it's
like...
love to hate kind of characters.
I'm not even necessarily sure it's love to hate. It's more like, we talked about this a bit in the Falcon and Winter Soldier review of, like, with U.S. Agent, where it's like, here's a version of a character who has been so traumatized by the, like, ideology of American military exceptionalism. And, like, that's what Peacemaker is, but in a more, like, comedic sense. He's, like, this character who has been brought up with this idea of American exceptionalism being so profoundly true that he's willing to do anything, even kill people he loves and cares about, in order to maintain that ideology. And, like, I can't hate him, because, like, even though he's the bastard who tries to kill Ratcatcher 2, who is the sweetest little baby angel in this movie, you know why he's doing it. You understand his reasoning and how broken he is as a person to get there, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
that's what makes a good villain.
Yeah.
Is when you can really understand them to the core.
Yeah. Like, he is a bastard, but I know why he's a bastard, and it's sad and also allows for a lot of great character moments.
And the whole conceit is like, what if Captain America was a psychotic dick?
Yeah.
And I think on the cover of his first, like, issue is like, he loves peace so much he'll kill for it. Mm-hmm. And like, it's kind of a silly gimmick, but it's also a fascinating idea for a character.
Yeah.
Because his line that you mentioned, like, he literally says, like, I love peace so much I'll kill, like, men, women, and children to achieve it. And it's like, that's kind of a funny, dark line, but it's a joke that leads to character development.
Yeah.
Because by the time he's got Ratcatcher 2 at gunpoint and about to shoot her, you're like, oh, fuck, like, he means it. Mm-hmm. And you can tell he doesn't want to do it, but he's so dedicated to his code that he will. Like, when he kills Flag, you see it in his face. He's hurt. He's hurt by the fact that he did it.
Yeah.
You know, he feels bad, but he still did it, and he's still going to do it again because it's the mission. He says, you know, she's like, okay, like, you know, take the disc, but why kill me? He's like,
because I'm thorough.
Yeah. Like, it's like, oh, fuck. Like,
yeah.
You know, we're watching this silly, irreverent movie, and then, like, it gets you by the gonads.
That's
with the character drama.
That's really, like, James Gunn's strength as a director, is this incredible balancing act of heartfelt and hilarious. Like, it's totally an irreverent, dark comedy. It's totally meant to not be taken too seriously. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It knows it's supposed to be funny and silly and enjoyable, but it still has that emotional core, that heart to get attached to. And I think that's what allows the comedy, like, I think the comedy and the heartfelt moments are, like, symbiotic. The fact that we care about these characters makes their jokes and funny moments even funnier, and the fact that they're funny characters that do funny things makes us care about them more. Like, the comedy is integral to the character, and the character is integral to the comedy, and James Gunn just does such a great job of this, like, cyclical pattern in his films.
You got anything else on Peacemaker, or do you want to move to Ratcatcher 2?
Let's talk about Ratcatcher 2.
Okay. She's the youngin' on the team. She's got that, like, what's she doing here? That's the thing about her. She's not really bloodthirsty. She's not a, you know, killer for hire like Bloodsport or Peacemaker. When they're on the bus going to their next mission point, they all start to bond. And she specifically starts to bond with Bloodsport, who we'll get to. She starts giving her backstory. She grew up with her father on the streets of Puerto Rico.
Something like that.
And he was a brilliant scientist. He loved his daughter so much. She loved him, but he was a heroin addict. And he created this device that allowed them to communicate and control rats. They would use the rats, to steal trinkets so they can, sell, and get money and get food. And they'd have the rats cover them like a blanket in the streets at night to keep them warm. It's an absurd idea that only in a way comics can be absurd, but it just works, because it's said with so much conviction and heart.
Yeah.
That you just buy into it. She moved to America after her father died, and she robbed a bank with the rats, and then that's how she ended up in prison. They labeled the rats a weapon.
Yeah, so that they could spit. It's really implied that Waller, or at least the U.S. government, wanted her to be in Belle Rev, and so that they could use her on this squad. Yeah. There's a lot of talk in this movie about how the prison system abuses its power and manipulates prisoners, which is surprisingly topical and political for a movie about a king shark and a polka dot man.
Yes.
There's a surprising amount of political undercurrents going on in this movie that have some serious real point. Amanda Waller is again a bastard who manipulates prisoners into slave labor under threat of death that to endanger their own lives to do missions that are too dirty for common superheroes. And there's a lot of exploration of how fucked up that is. I also love about Ratcatcher 2, specifically her backstory with her dad, we get a portrayal of a drug addict that is not negative. Her dad isn't abusive. Her dad isn't this sick, neglectful bastard or anything. He's a caring, loving father with a drug addiction. And the way she talks about him is his burden eventually was too heavy for him to bear. He dies of an overdose. It's such a real human portrayal of drug addiction of he's still a person. He still loves his daughter. He's still doing his best to take care of her, even though his drug addiction is making their lives harder. It was surprisingly profound for this movie to be drug addicts are not these horrible, horrible people, and they're not just tragic figures. They're people, that have connections and have lives and try to live them, but they're burdened by this thing that they have. And
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's just beautiful that this was in this movie.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's one of those tropes that's broken that you don't quite necessarily know that you want broken or are conscious of it until it gets broken.
Yeah.
Because so much of media is oddly kind of conservative, to use a word, about, depicting drug addicts. So they might be just unrepentant criminals in something, or gangbangers, or just pieces of shit, abusive pieces of shit. And
at their most positive portrayal, they're usually these tragic figures who are horribly disfigured and horribly out of their minds, but non-violently so. But here it's he's not that. He is a heroin addict, yes, and it's ruining his life, but he's still a person who has a connection with his daughter.
The denouement of the whole movie, which I don't think I want to spoil right now, but he's a character that has one line and two little flashback scenes, but his character and his one line is so important to the overall theme of the movie, because Ratcatcher 2 is the character that is the one that breaks down the barriers for everybody, and kind of brings them together, because this also leads into Bloodsport. When they're talking on the bus and she's revealing her backstory, she's talking to Bloodsport, because his whole thing, he's just kind of a bastard. He has a daughter, and which is another kind of point in comparison to Deadshot in the first one.
Yeah.
But the Deadshot daughter thing in the first one, it's that cliche of oh, he's a bad guy, but he just wants to be close and be with his daughter because he still loves his daughter. And Bloodsport here, he loves his daughter, but he's still an asshole. He doesn't know how to connect to her. It's such a refreshing sort of portrayal of this dynamic.
He doesn't want to connect to her. He has this idea of I'm a bastard who will ruin your life. I don't want anything to do with you because you shouldn't have anything to do with me. So Yeah, it's a much more realistic depiction of, like, what a criminal who literally just murders people for money would be like if he had a kid.
In a lesser movie, their scene together in prison when he's talking to his daughter would go the way you would think. Oh, they're going to have this heart-to-heart, and he's going to have this sorrowful sort of look in his eye, and, like, maybe give me a chance, or I can make it better, or I can make it right. That's not how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, I got arrested for stealing. And he's like, well, what'd you steal? And I stole this, like, it's an Apple Watch, but it's not called an Apple Watch.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, next time you want to steal something, bring a partner.
He gives her criminal advice. And, like, they just get into this screaming fuck you match, like, a fucked up relationship that they have. And you can tell that, like, he doesn't want anything to do with, like, there's never a moment. There's a moment later where she sees him on TV, like, saving people, and she's like, that's my dad. And, like, you can say, like, oh, that's a little cliche or whatever, but, like, he never has a moment with his daughter where they just get together and everything's hunky-dory and, like, they have a happy life together. It's just, like, no, like, he doesn't want anything to do with her because, like, he's fucked up and he doesn't want to fuck her up. But then Waller threatens his daughter and he's like, fuck, okay, I guess I'll go do this so that she won't be in jail.
Yeah, his motivation isn't to reconnect with his daughter. His motivation is to just get his daughter away from Waller's machinations.
Mm-hmm.
We do get the surrogate daughter connection with Ratcatcher 2 on the bus. It's, again, just another understated moment where, you know, he's like, she tells her whole spiel. Mm-hmm. And he's like, you know, you kind of remind me of my daughter. He's like, I'm going to get you out of here alive. And then she, you know, being the little sweetie that she's like, I'm going to get you out of here alive.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just like, he wipes his face a little because you can see he's kind of getting emotional. And she's like, oh, they're bonding. Family. Family.
And then she does get him out of there alive at the end.
Yep. Oh, and Bloodsport has a severe fear of rats.
Yeah. So it's great that they bond.
Yeah, because he has the opposite sort of backstory as Ratcatcher 2. His father was an abusive monster who, if he fucked up, would dole out these extreme, insane punishments. And one of them was he locked him in a box for, was it 24 hours?
Something like that.
With a bunch of starving rats. So he has this huge phobia of rats. And Ratcatcher 2 has her own little pet rat named Sebastian who waves and is adorable.
He's so cute. He's just a rat. Ratcatcher 2 is just like a more grisly version of Squirrel Girl. Like, she's
yeah, kind of just a dirtier version of Squirrel Girl.
Like if Squirrel Girl was like a dirty bum, which I guess she kind of is because she was living in the Avengers attic for a while. But like, if Squirrel Girl was just this dirty bum character, this is who she'd be.
They even make, you know, because Bloodsport, I guess you could say, is the normal, quote-unquote, one of the group. He's, you know, but he's, even through all the insanity around him, he's still very likable and very compelling.
Yeah.
His whole thing, of course, is like, you know, kind of learning to let his barriers down and, like, open up. During the big finale, we'll get to the big reveal. Ratcatcher 2 basically saves the whole day. She summons all the rats around the city to take down the bad guy. You know, she's like, I'm going to get you out of here alive. She said that earlier. So Bloodsport, he's on his hands and knees in the middle of the street, just like trying to hide himself from this horde of rats. And they're running over him. And like, there's so much emotion in non-dialogue moments in this movie that I love.
Yeah. Like,
she's got her device. She's summoning the rats. And like, she cares enough about Bloodsport. She looks over, she sees him cowering, and she just puts her arm around him. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And like, while he's afraid, and there's this brief little shot. It's like 1 second. It's just this very extreme close-up of his eyes squinting in fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it just humanizes him so much.
Yeah. Because
you could just feel how actually like scared he is and how he's pretty much just back to being that little kid. And the movie ends like, spoilers, Bloodsport's still alive. Ratcatcher 2 is still alive. King Shark, woo! Still alive. And Harley, we haven't gotten to Harley yet.
Yeah.
And the movie just ends with him on the getaway plane with Sebastian, and he's just like tentatively like, okay, I'm gonna pet it. I'm gonna pet the rat. I have gotten over my trauma. I have let myself open up a little, and that's just how it ends with him just petting Sebastian, and it's such a great little moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that moment where Sebastian finally gets some... Everyone is so rude to Sebastian the whole movie. Nobody's nice to him except for Ratcatcher 2. Everybody's like... He waves at people. He tries to shake Bloodsport's hand at one point. and everybody is just so rude to little Sebastian, who's just there trying to be nice and helpful to his friend. And finally, and finally at the end, Bloodsport manages to pet him, and it's a nice little sweet moment.
Talked about Polka Dot Man.
Should we talk about Harley? Because that kind of also bleeds into the other part of the plot as well.
Yeah. With
the diversion team, the two that survived, everybody else died except for Harley Quinn and Rick Flag. Rick Flag manages to reconvene with the rebels and then eventually the rest of the Suicide Squad. Harley gets kidnapped and taken to this regime the regime leader who basically apparently knows about her and sees her as an icon of rebellion against America.
Like anti-American sentiment?
I guess because she's a criminal? I don't know. I don't necessarily see any of her stuff from the DC movies as being necessarily anti-American, just anti-authority and criminal in general.
I took it as the movie not saying that is what she is, just that's how him and his people see her.
I guess. Here's my thing with Harley. It's one of the complaints I do have with this film. Harley very much seems like a character who was put into this movie because she is Harley Quinn. She is the big face of DC right now. Possibly their most marketable figure in the films, at least. And, she's fun. Margot Robbie does a fantastic job here. This is possibly my favorite movie with her in it in terms of her performance. But, you can very much tell that she sort of has, plot armor. There's lots of scenes where she should have straight up been killed and she's just not because she's Harley Quinn. And other scenes where it's things are happening with the main squad and then we just cut away to Harley Quinn just kind of doing her own thing because she's Harley Quinn and she gets to do her own thing. And it's not bad. I really like the scene where she breaks herself out and kills a whole shitload of guys and escapes, and then the squad tries to come and save her. And then she just walks up to them while they're trying to break into the building and she's like, "You guys were gonna save me, that's so sweet."
You want me to go back inside? You can still do it.
Yeah, it's a very funny, sweet moment. But there's definitely it kind of pulls at the plot threads a bit because you have this very much connection between the rest of the team and they're developing that sort of found family trope. And then you have Harley just kind of doing her own shit for 2/3 of the movie. And then she just kind of hops in to the main plot, in the latter part of the second act.
Yeah. That is the one criticism I see people have, and it's she kind of slows the pacing down, and I can see that, but it doesn't bother me because I will agree with you in that I think this is the best Margot Robbie has been in the role.
What I really love about her characterization here is that you get to see very much the Harley Quinn post-Joker that I feel like they were trying to go for a bit with Birds of Prey, but Birds of Prey was more her the breakup phase, whereas I don't need him, but yeah, I kind of still want him, but where here it's you very much see a Harley Quinn who's kind of gotten over the Joker and is trying to figure things out. There's a hilarious sort of monologue she gives where she has this quick romantic fling with the head of the regime, and then he starts talking about how he's gonna kill anyone who gets in his way, and she fucking shoots him just out of nowhere. And then she goes on this long monologue, not because he was being evil or anything. She's like, "I swore to myself if I saw any red flags pop up, and I really think you're a pretty nice guy, but I swore to myself, Harley, if you see any red flags, you need to drop it immediately. And, a girl like me just can't walk away, so I really had to kill you." It's this great, it's both really funny and also a really good showing of how she's progressed as a character. It's yeah, you go, girl, you kill this bastard who was going to ruin your life.
You stole my thunder because I wanted to talk about that.
Oh, scene. Sorry, my bad.
But yeah, Harley has, even though she's a bit separate from the main plot for a while, she has two of some of my favorite moments in the movie. The one was the whole monologue she has. It's such a great insight into her character.
Mm-hmm.
But he was being evil.
Yeah.
He's I guess we should explain exactly who this guy is. Him and the general of the military did a coup to the ruling family, who had been ruling the country for years and years and years and conducting experiments on the people at Jotunheim.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets Harley and he dresses her up and they have this romantic fling and she's really into him and they have crazy violent sex. That starts a fire. And he's just talking. He's like, yeah, they did all this and they did that. And that's when I said, like, if anybody tries to oppose me, I'll kill them. Men, women, children, kind of peacemakery.
Yeah.
And like when he starts talking about just like murdering people indiscriminately, she's like, "Oh, there's the red flag." you just hear the gunshot go off and see him get shot.
Yeah. And
she has a great line that's like really disturbing during her monologue, where she's like, "You look, and to be honest, you look better this way." And then it cuts to him just like dead, bleeding out on the floor.
Yeah.
With all those, and she's like, with all those nasty thoughts leaving your head.
Yeah.
I'm just like this. I'm like, this is pure Harley.
It really is that sort of fucked up, like.
And at the same time, you're just, it's very much like, even though it's darkly funny and also disturbing, it's very much a you go girl moment.
Mm-hmm.
And her breakout scene later, the assassination scene ends with a funny gag. Mm-hmm. They all bust in and she's like, I can't believe this gun had a bullet, because they set up the gun earlier when they're fooling around. Mm-hmm. It's in like this display case and it falls out and stuff like that. So it's set up. It's not just a random gun. But she's being tortured and then she breaks out in this awesome, crazy, cool, violent fight scene. Oh, she has Javelin's javelin.
That's such a fun through lines, is that Javelin, who's just a guy with a javelin, she has like this little crush on him at the beginning of the movie. Then he fucking dies in the first 15 minutes. And like, in his dying breath, he's like, take my javelin. I need you to, and then he dies. And she's like, you need me to what? And the whole movie, she's trying to figure out what the fuck to do with this javelin. She's just carrying it around in place of her hammer.
And when she's breaking out and killing all the bad guys, you get Harley vision. Mm-hmm. She kind of just goes into a crazy stupor. Mm-hmm. Like all of a sudden, like she's shooting all these guns and then all these flowers explode in the back of her and gunshot blood splatters turn into flower splatters and there's cute little cartoon birds. And she sees the javelin leaning up against like a door and like it like glows. She's like, there it is. And she starts kicking ass with that. And then when Bloodsport and Peacemaker are there, Flag and Bloodsport, Flag's like, why do you have that javelin? She's like, I don't know, I'm waiting for God to tell me. And that javelin is like one of the fucking most OP weapons in all of DC so far.
Yeah. I will say this actually kind of reminded me of my only other real complaint with the film. Because we were talking about how there's the regime leader and the general. There's like 4 villains in this movie, and none of them are really that important, to be honest. The regime leader, Harley kills him in the first part of the second act. And then the general just kind of takes his place as like I hate America and we're going to unleash whatever horrible thing is in Jotunheim on America. And like, he's really not an interesting character. He's just this bastard who wants to like kill a whole bunch of people. And then there's the Thinker, who's just this mad scientist who was experimenting on the final villain, who we'll get to in a minute. And then there's the final villain who, while very crazy comic booky fun as an antagonist, there's not really much to them as a character. So I think the villains here are kind of weak, and there's 4 of them, which just kind of splits them up too much to where it's like, we really don't give a fuck about the antagonists. It's really just watching the protagonists like develop and grow, which is fine. Like, I liked seeing like all the protagonists, and the antagonists did their jobs as like obstacles, but like there's not really much to get attached to in terms of the villains.
I could see that for the Quarter Maltese side of the villainy, but I guess it depends on who you think the real villains are. Me, I think the main villain is Waller.
Oh yeah, because Waller's a bitch.
She's a great villain because, I mean, I love Amanda Waller in the comics. She's one of my favorite DC characters, actually, because she's this interesting person because she's such a fucking asshole. Yeah. But she has her reasons for doing what she's doing. I would say Waller's the main villain. And then after Waller comes Peacemaker, I'd say, even though he doesn't reveal himself to be the villain until the third act.
He's a twist villain.
And then you have the big bad who they have to like take down. Who is Starro the Conqueror? I love Starro, just like I love King Shark. I just love Starro is the first villain the Justice League ever fought in the comics. And they really, for me, they did him pitch perfectly. I mean, this is Starro.
For those unfamiliar with Starro the Conqueror, Starro the Conqueror is a very large starfish with one gigantic eye in the center of its body.
An alien starfish.
Yeah, who can release a bunch of smaller versions of himself that latch onto people's faces and take control of them like zombies. That is Starro. He is a kaiju-sized starfish.
And he uses the energy he gets from attaching to people's faces and controlling them to feed.
To get bigger.
Yes. And it's just, it's one of those crazy comic ideas that you would think they would kind of, most movies would try to tone down.
Yeah.
Because we're used to comic book movies toning down certain elements of the characters, making their origins a little bit more believable, even toning down their costumes to look less silly.
Making them a little less powerful, too.
Yeah, but Starro is a big pink and blue starfish with a giant eye with mind control powers. And in this movie, he's a giant pink and blue starfish with a giant eye with mind control powers.
If anything, they made him even more out there by making it, like, incredibly grotesque the way his mind control works.
Oh, yeah. Nothing...
Like, it's not like they just latch on and then, like, after Starro is defeated, like, the starfish just pop off. Like, once they latch on, that person is dead. They're a corpse that he is controlling. And, like, all the experiments and stuff, you see, like, Starro attached to these, like, severed corpses. There's one with, like, its lower half just cut off and its intestines dangling down, but it's still moving around because Starro's controlling it. Like, there's one with, like, the star halfway peeled off, and you can see, like, it's the person's face beneath is just ripped to pieces, and there's these little tentacles, like, attaching into its brain. It's, like, it's so fucking grotesque, the way they did this mind control. It's, like, that was the part of the movie I was like, ugh. Like, it was like, I don't like...
I was waiting for your vocal reactions to the gore at some point.
Gross. Like King Shark ripping a man in half is like so ridiculously over the top, cartoony, violent that it's like, okay, yeah, whatever. Watching like this starfish stick its little weird tentacles into people's brains and severed bodies and stuff is like, ugh, that's nasty.
And it's supposed to be. Yeah. That's how good the balance, the tonal balance of the movie is for the whole movie. Like, the gore has been like over the top and like, oh my god, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. But we finally get into Jotunheim and see what they're doing with Starro. It's grim and it's nasty and it's disturbing. And I've made mention of this before on the pod. Like, I'm the horror guy.
Yeah.
And like, I've seen some crazy nasty shit. I'm never going to show Isaac because he'll probably judge me if I show him.
Oh, I judge you anyway, but like, still.
and like, even some of the imagery in this, like, just because this is a comic book movie and a big blockbuster, I was like, ooh, wow. It's specifically that shot of the face with just the star-shaped flesh just peeled from it. Mm-hmm. And the person was still alive, and they're like, oh, I'm like, ooh.
Nasty.
That's hardcore.
Yeah.
And by the time Starro is breaking out of Jotunheim, kaiju-sized, I'm just like, this I don't want this movie to end. This is everything I want out of comic books. It's ridiculous, but it embraces the ridiculousness in a way that, okay, I'm going to do another tangent. Sorry.
That's fine.
Just let me preface this by saying that I'm not making this a Marvel versus DC thing. That's not what I'm doing. It's just Marvel is the only other huge comic book movie thing out there now. So comparisons are just, going to happen. I'm an MCU fan, but one of my biggest issues with it is that a lot of the times the humor acts in a way to sort of apologize for the premise, mm-hmm. if you know what I mean. Like,
yeah,
depending on the movie, some more, some less. But Joss Whedon and James Gunn with Guardians kind of cemented the MCU humor. And since the Avengers, the first Avengers and Guardians, like, really became huge and cemented that humor, like, every movie since has tried to incorporate some of that into it. It just, unless like they really know what they're doing and it's written well and it's directed well and performed well, a lot of it falls flat.
There's a level of sarcasm in it that, like, if it's not done correctly, comes off as disingenuous.
Yeah, like they just it's a little too meta. It's a little too wink sometimes. Like, I just occasionally I want to watch a superhero movie that doesn't pause to tell the audience it's okay to laugh at it.
It's also like, it was established a lot with Tony Stark's character of like this sort of snarky, sarcastic, humor style that's going on. And then like they kind of integrated it into every character's dialogue. And it's like, not every character needs to talk like Tony Stark, Like, Tony Stark is his own character, and he has his own identity and his own way of talking. Not everyone needs to speak the same way he does.
Yeah, and it's just been a pet peeve of mine with a lot of comic book movies. Like, they just have this irony to them that don't need to be there, that just feels dishonest and disingenuous at times. Like, Doctor Strange, like, not to pick on that movie, but, like, it's one of the more serious MCU movies. It has some humor, but, like, there's that part, and it's a little part, and it doesn't ruin the movie, but it's indicative of what the problem is. It's like the final act, Doctor Strange is suiting up to like go into like the final confrontation, and the cloak comes on him, and there's just like a gag of like the cloak like
that's
falling.
Nasty. I cannot believe that movie gets a PG-13 rating with that.
Wait, what?
You said the cloak comes on him. I really don't. How did they get a PG-13 rating out of that movie?
Shut up. Anyway, like there's just like it's this cool suit up moment, Doctor Strange, yay! But then there's like a gag with the cloak, and it's just like, no, don't do that. Don't undermine the cool hero moment, because that's why we go to these things, is to see the cool hero moment.
Yeah,
like not to harp on the point, but that's just indicative of the problem, as I said. And with Suicide Squad, yeah, it's silly and ridiculous, but not in a way that makes fun of itself. It just embraces the absurdity and shows it to you and tells you to go along with the ride.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time there's this big, giant blue and pink starfish rampaging in a city, you're just like, yeah, okay. I'm here for it. And the special effects are fantastic with Starro. Like, he looks really good. Like, the special effects throughout the whole movie are great. King Shark looks fantastic, but Starro looks really good. And as gross as the movie is, nothing grossed me out more than seeing his giant, nasty, like ground beef looking armpits spitting out all the little Starros.
Yeah, there's like these big folded armpits, and out of each of the glands come little starfish things. It's like, oh no.
It's like, ugh.
It's nasty.
Kind of gross. Like, he does that in the comics, but not with that much detail.
It's somebody's fetish.
It's... Yep, somebody's watching this movie who's like,
Starfish armpit, yes.
Yeah, even me, who can eat spaghetti watching the grossest movie ever, the armpit spewing little starfishes. I'm just like, ugh. I bet that stinks. Ew.
They came out as little clouds too. So it was like little odor clouds that came out of him. It's nasty.
I want them to add special more sound effects to that, just like little machine gun sounds as they're going shooting out of his armpit. The third act of this movie just gets bonkers, and every time I think it's not going to one up itself, it does.
Did we miss somebody, or did we talk about all the major characters?
We talked about all the major characters except for Milton.
Milton, no! Oh God, Milton! I don't want to spoil Milton for them. People need to watch the movie and see how tragic the story of Milton is.
But Milton is so important.
He is, but...
for a reason, and I want to talk about why he's important.
Okay. I wanted to leave something for these people to enjoy fresh.
They know that it's... this isn't going to be out until like at least a month after the movie has been out anyway.
That's true, and we spoil everything in these reviews. Go ahead. What's special about Milton?
Milton is just this guy. He's a contact that they get along the mission. He's basically their driver.
He drives the bus.
And what's so funny is that once they meet up with him, like an hour into the movie, he's there the whole time. But because these other characters like take up so much of the room, like you don't notice that he's there all the time, but he is. And then in the third act, they're surrounded by bad guys and Milton dies. Polka Dot Man takes it to heart, and he's with Bloodsport and Harley, and they're like, okay, we gotta go. And he's like, oh, they killed Milton. At first, it's a joke, of course, and they're like, who? Who the fuck is Milton?
Yeah, Bloodsport was like, Milton was still with us, and then Harley
And he's like, and Polka Dot Man's just like, are you guys serious right now? He's been with us the whole time. He was a really nice guy, and I really liked him. And because Polka Dot Man is like so like sincere about it, it stops being a gag for a minute, because I think what Milton does is contextualize the body count of the movie a little bit. Like the whole movie, we've been seeing people just get slaughtered in the craziest of ways. But here's this one guy that one of the characters liked and cared about, even though he wasn't important. Like, he's still a person. He was still a life. I just think it's like a cool little way that the movie acknowledges, like, you know, people are dying and like some of them matter. So I just think that was a nice little twist, that another great little moment of heart that James Gunn was able to inject into the script.
I like that Harley doesn't like make fun of him for being sad about Milton. She's just like confused as to who Milton was. She like leans over and she like looks. She's like, "Oh, Milton!"
She's like, "Oh, that Milton, yeah." So may he rest in peace, the sixth member of Squad 2, Milton. So by the time Starro escapes and is rampaging, because he's been experimented on and tortured for 30 some odd years, he's angry and he wants to destroy shit, because who wouldn't? Yeah. The only ones left around are Bloodsport, King Shark, Harley, and Ratcatcher 2, and Polka Dot Man. Bloodsport is at a loss for what to do, so he starts rallying the troops. He's like, okay, we gotta stop this thing. What are we gonna do? And he's pep talking everybody. He kind of does a Hulk smash moment with King Shark.
Oh, he's like, skipped the part where Waller told him not to go.
Oh, yeah.
Waller told them to return after they got the data and everything, and they disobeyed, and she was about to kill him. And then, like, one of her people in, like, the room with her knocks her unconscious, which is just such a fuck yeah moment. Because Waller is such a bastard. Everybody fucking hates Waller for good reason, because she threatens to, like, throw Bloodsport's daughter in jail and have her killed for trying to steal, like, an Apple Watch just to piss him off enough to go and, like, do this whole damn mission.
Yeah.
And it's not like an idle threat. It's very clear, like, she intends to do this shit. Like, fuck Waller. Fuck Waller so hard. And, like...
See? There are good villains because you're very upset about Waller.
Yeah, 'cause she's one that you love to hate. And, like, having another one of her people, and we see, like, there's this moment with all the people who, like, run the operations. There's just a few of them. I don't even know if they necessarily get names at any point, but they're this sort of, like, goofy group that really stands apart from her seriousness. Because, like, it really helps ground her seriousness, too, as, like, part of her character. Because now it's just not, like, a serious character amongst other serious characters. It's, like, a serious character amongst all these other people who are, like, $40 on the shark dying, or, like, they're just, like, gambling on people's lives, and they're joking about it. But, like, throughout the movie, you see them slowly being, like, man, this is kind of fucked up, this shit that Waller's making them do. And by the end, when one of them knocks her unconscious, it's just like, fuck yeah! Fuck yeah, good on you all. You all were bastards at the beginning of this movie, and now you have a conscience again.
Yeah. It's a good moment, one, because she gets her shit knocked out, and two, because the whole heroic turn is also just a moment that could have been cheesy, but it's understated. Like, Starro's rampaging, Waller's like, okay, mission accomplished, like, come home, and they all start walking away. And then Ratcatcher 2 is like, are we going to do this? And then Bloodsport's just like, fuck.
He's like, turns around.
And he turns around, and then everybody starts following him, and then King Shark has a great line, where go, friend?
Yeah.
So he's trying to rally the troops. King Shark nom nom. King Shark runs and takes a big old chunk out of Starro. Polka Dot Man. Oh, Polka Dot Man.
Polka Dot Man.
Bloodsport's, hey, you know what? You know who that is? He's like, what? He's like, it's your mom. And then Polka Dot Man looks, and then there's just this giant kaiju mom wrecking shit. And then Polka Dot Man's like, oh, God. And then he unleashes his polka dots, and it hurts Starro pretty good. Gets one of his legs. And then Polka Dot Man feels so accomplished.
He goes, I am a superhero. And he gets
smushed. And he gets smushed.
Into paste.
It's just one final dig to the team that you like.
And it's a great moment, because here it is in the climax where we're kind of thinking like, here's their hero moment, so maybe they're all going to be okay. And it's a reminder like, nope, their lives are totally still on the line. Any of them could die any second now.
Yep. King Shark gets thrown into a building. You don't know if he's all right. what the fuck are they going to do? Bloodsport's gun's not working because he has this cool tech gun that he's been using throughout the movie. And just when I think the movie can't get any like crazier, here comes Harley with her fucking javelin. And it's like one of my favorite images of the movie. She jumps with the javelin and stabs him in the Starro's eye and just goes through the eye. And she's just suspended in this giant eye.
In its eye fluid. It's so nasty.
But it's oddly beautiful.
The movie frames it as like this like mysterious like moment where she's just like floating in the water of the eye, and like there's all these colors and stuff going around, and she's just like kind of at a peaceful moment. And then fucking Ratcatcher's rats swim in and start eating like the optic nerves and shit, and eating Starro from inside, and there's blood in the water and everything. And the whole time there's just this soothing music as Harley's hair floats behind her. She smiles in like a daze, and it's so fucked up. It's a perfect sign-off for this movie because it's so fucked up, and the whole time I'm just sitting there like, this makes me deeply uncomfortable, but it fits the tone of this movie so damn well.
It's so crazy, and I love it so much because it's just, you don't see this shit in big blockbusters at all. Like, we have Harley Quinn floating in a giant starfish eyeball, and because we know Harley perceives reality differently from her flower massacre earlier, you understand why she's in this eyeball and she's enjoying it. You understand why she thinks it's so pretty, because her perception's fucked up. So it's like this weird like culmination of just like the ideas of the movie. Like, we have these downtrodden people, you know, scum of society. They're the ones who end up, you know, mattering, making a difference. And that's like the pin in the whole movie is when Ratcatcher 2 is saving the day. There's a flashback to being with her dad. And she's like, why rats, Papa? You know, he says, rats are the lowliest of all God's creatures. If they have purpose, so do we all. And it's this great little line, and it ties the room together. Just like the rug in The Big Lebowski. It just ties the room together.
I love that line. I love everything about Ratcatcher and her backstory. I really do think she's like the core emotional tying force in this film. Like, everyone gets their heartfelt moments and everything, but like, I really feel like Ratcatcher 2 is the one who sort of ties everything together.
Yeah, you don't peg her as the one that's going to save the day.
No.
You figured because it's a superhero movie and it's big and it's violent and it's crazy, it's going to be Bloodsport or Peacemaker or both of them or Harley. And it's Ratcatcher. She's the big hero of the whole thing.
Yeah. And
that wraps it up. King Shark comes stumbling out of a building, looking dazed, a little beat up, and Ratcatcher goes and gives him a big old hug.
Yeah, they have a great moment on like the flat back where like she falls asleep on his arm, and you can tell he's just so happy to have a friend.
Yep. Oh God, he's making me cry like 3 times. And that's Suicide Squad. That's how it ends. Well, that's not how it ends. The funniest fucking joke in the whole movie comes after the title card.
Oh my God. So it cuts.
The first time I saw
it. Go ahead.
First time I saw it, I laughed my ass off. Second time I saw it with you, I laughed my ass off.
Okay, so it cuts back to the beach where the original squad was, the diversion team. And it cuts to fucking Weasel lying on the beach, and he starts coughing up water. He's alive. Weasel survived. He just coughs up water, looks around, stand up, and he just like awkwardly runs away. And it's so damn
chittering the whole time.
He's just like a chupacabra on this island now. He's just off to become like a local legend. Oh, it's
perfect
so
fucking
funny.
joke to end the movie on.
Yeah.
And I don't like belly loud laugh in movies often. Even if I find the movie I'm watching funny, I'm not a boisterous laugher. But everything with fucking Weasel in this movie just had me cackling.
He's not around long, but my God, is he amazing while he's there. Also Peacemaker. Peacemaker. Yes, I wanted to say Peacekeeper for some reason. Peacemaker survived. Survived. I don't know if we actually said like Bloodsport.
Oh yeah, we didn't.
Yeah. Like he's about to kill Ratcatcher, and Bloodsport sees this and shoots him. Like they actually shoot at each other, and his bullet goes through Peacemaker's bullet.
Which is the cool payoff, because earlier they're dick measuring like their skills. And Peacemaker is like, oh, I'm more accurate because my bullets are smaller, and they go through
your bullets,
your bullets, and then Bloodsport's bullet ends up going through Peacemaker's bullet because it's smaller.
Yeah.
So that's a cool little twist of a payoff there.
Yeah.
Peacemaker is alive. Yep, and he has a show coming out, so that's why there's that stinger there, which I'm excited for because
I did not expect John Cena to be such a good actor in here. Like,
I know.
He did a really good performance here.
The question is, who found him? You know who found him? It was fucking Weasel.
Weasel just dragged him back to America.
When he woke up on the beach, because it looks like it wasn't that same night, just later.
Yeah.
Maybe his comm came back online and like
go
he was just doing his own thing, and Waller was just like, Weasel, go get Peacemaker in the
Oh boy.
That's my headcanon.
Oh boy.
That's my headcanon.
Should we do some nerd ethics?
Let's wrap up our overall thoughts about the film and the themes and all that.
All right.
I absolutely adored this movie. As you can tell, for the past 2 hours, I've been raving about it. If I had to come up with a few little niggles and naggles here, my only real gripe that kind of bothered me is the Thinker. He's played by Peter Capaldi. He's the one who experimented on Starro. Peter Capaldi's a great actor. He's good in the movie. He didn't have to be the Thinker because they established that he has mind powers, but he never uses them.
Oh yeah, he never does anything that really establishes him as like a genius. Yeah.
That's like the only area where I think the movie just dropped the ball on. Is Thinker really doesn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's such a joyously ridiculous, heartfelt extravaganza. I'm a sucker for the found family trope, and I'm a sucker for movies that, embrace the outlaws, the renegades, the weirdos, and James Gunn is just so good at doing that.
Yeah.
And I just love the theme of like there's a running theme of bad people subjugating things that they perceive to be beneath them, whether it's birds or alien starfish or people. There's a theme of people being used and stepped on because they're thought of as lowly. And the whole idea of the movie is that these people, they may be bad people, they may have done bad things in the past, but they can still find a purpose and they can still do good. It's a really fun message. It's a really heartfelt message, and it's not cheesy. It's not saccharine. And
it ties into some more serious, like, real-world themes, like we talked about earlier with, like, prison system that we have where we exploit people,
Yeah, there's commentary about the prison system. There's a lot of commentary about American foreign policy, because the reason this island, this Corte Maltese, is hosting Starro and experimenting on it, because Americans want to do it, and America doesn't want to have that kind of shit happening on their soil. This nation is basically just a scapegoat. Amongst all the craziness, there's a lot of social and political commentary underneath to dig into as well.
Yeah, but it's not it's not heavy-handed. It's woven in with all the other themes.
This is probably one of my favorite comic book movies so far, ever. I love it. I love everything about it so much.
High praise. So I want to talk a bit about the DC Extended Universe to sort of contextualize my thoughts on this movie. For the longest time, I really wasn't terribly into the DC films. I had this trend where, I'd watch them once and be like, that was okay. And then I'd go back and watch them again and be like, that really wasn't that good. And, my opinions on them would lessen with each viewing. That happened with Man of Steel. That happened with Batman vs. Superman, both the theatrical release of it and the extended version.
You said you liked Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman a little better after you watched them again.
No, I think I said the exact opposite.
Well, anyway.
You're remembering it. That's wishful thinking on your part, unfortunately, because Tyler is the big DC fan. But yeah, both of those movies, Justice League as well, and even the extended cut of Justice League, I wasn't big on. But I can safely say now that I like the more recent DC films. I haven't watched the new Wonder Woman. The 1980s.
I'm curious what you'll think of that, because that movie is very divisive.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people don't like that one, but the original Wonder Woman, I think, was really good. I have a few problems with it, but I think overall it's good. I liked Aquaman. I thought it was a fun movie that had some, new, more interesting superhero action scenes with, all the weird fish and underwater stuff. Shazam is fantastic. It's one of my favorite superhero movies just because of the way that it portrays like the sort of childlike wonder of superheroes. And this very much fits into that theme of like DC is making good superhero movies now. And what I really appreciate it is that even though this is all technically part of the same like DC cinematic universe or whatever, the DC films are very much more standalone films, you know, like you don't have to watch the original Suicide Squad, which don't watch the original Suicide Squad because I watched it once and it was shit and I don't really remember anything about it. You can watch these films on their own and they're their own stories, whereas with Marvel, it's much more of this woven, integrated tapestry that's all together, and you have to have all these other stories contextualized, which we've talked about before. There are pros and cons to that. There's pros in the sense that, like, this is something very new on this scale, and it gives this new sort of cinematic experience. But on the con side, it feels like every movie sort of bleeds into each other and spends more time trying to set up the next film than really appreciating its own story. And not all Marvel films are responsible for that. But I really appreciate that this one just, it's its own story about these characters with its own themes told in its own way. Like, this doesn't feel like Wonder Woman. This doesn't feel like Shazam. This doesn't feel like Batman vs. Superman or Justice League or anything. This feels like its own film. It's not trying to thematically or aesthetically match anything else. It is its own movie, and it's addressing its own themes and characters in a way that it wants to. And I greatly admire it for that. I really do like this movie a whole lot more. I do have some problems with it, like I said, with the villains, and I feel like Harley's story is a little too much to the side for most of the film, and she kind of distracts from the found family narrative because, you know, she's not really with the rest of the team until the third act. But, like, for the most part, I really enjoy this movie, too. I think it's a great superhero film, and just a great... There's very much an appreciation for comics on display here that a lot of comic book movies are afraid to go whole hog into.
Yeah. Well said, well said. And I'm really glad you brought up the movie just having its own identity, complete in and of itself, because what I find really disappointing now is that because the shared universe idea has been so successful with Marvel, and now is becoming a bit more successful with DC being more accepted, is that now, because it's such a thing, fans just expect everything to just like tease the next thing and lead into the next thing and build into the next thing. And it's like, now fans, like, they're not even allowing themselves to just appreciate what they're watching.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't like drop a bunch of hints to like what's coming next, then they feel disappointed.
You know, it's sad that that's kind of connected to comic book culture in general, because comic books are long-running comic book series are established that way. They never end. The story never ends. You just get like these ongoing series that end on another cliffhanger and another cliffhanger and another cliffhanger. The way the Marvel formula is very much the comic book formula of you continue having cliffhangers and like teasers for what comes next. That, like, it's kind of shitty, but it's also very much just like an ingrained problem with comic book culture.
Believe me, don't get me wrong, like, that's part of the fun is, you know, the hints and teases.
Yeah.
But like, I keep seeing it with everything now. Like when WandaVision came out, I kept seeing a bunch of takes like, it was all right, I guess, but it didn't add anything big to the main story. I saw that with WandaVision, with Falcon and Winter Soldier, and now with the Suicide Squad. It's like, that's not the point. Like, that's not a flaw. That's just your own expectations because you've been so spoiled by everything this past like 15 years with these movies that you just, you know, expect this big commercial for the next thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, no, take a step back and appreciate what you just saw, you know?
It's especially sad because it is more coming from, like, griping fans now than from the studios themselves. Like, Marvel has done a lot. It still has a bunch of teaser stuff in it, of course, but it's done a lot to sort of step away from the formula. Like, WandaVision was its own story that, while it teased other things, it was very much a story about Wanda going through her trauma and everything. And, like, it wasn't meant to be an advertisement for another show. Same with, like, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Yes, it established some stuff that's going to come up in later series and later films and everything, but that's not the purpose of that story. the fact that like the studio is sort of branching out in its styles, like how WandaVision, did like the sitcom tropes, and also like going into more like heavy political themes and everything. The fact that like the fans are pushing back against that is really sad, because like if it was just a studio pushing it, that's one thing, but like the fans themselves are so conditioned to be like, we just want a big advertisement for the next thing. That's what really sucks, because now it's like, well, they're going to start catering to that, and it also basically shows that, like, hey, their advertising worked.
Yeah, and it's doubly sad because it's more like brand loyalty than fandom in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I've literally seen the take of, this didn't matter for WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, Suicide Squad. I'm like, what do you mean it didn't matter? Like, because, like, it didn't have this huge Easter egg for, like, the next thing, or didn't have a bunch of cameos that you wanted. Like, to say something didn't matter because, like, it wasn't a commercial for the next thing is just, it bums me out.
This is totally off topic, but that just reminded me. You know what else doesn't technically matter? Indiana Jones's role in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh yeah,
if you take Indiana Jones out of Raiders of the Lost Ark, like the plot just happens the same. The Nazis get the Ark, they open it up, they all die. Like it's the exact same plot.
It's like we don't want to keep repeating myself, but just these are movies. They're not issues of a comic, even though they're trying to stylistically in certain ways replicate a comic book. It's still a movie. It's still a narrative. It has to function as a movie.
There's also this idea tied to that of like this worship of plot. This idea that the most important thing in a story is the series of events that happen. And it's like, no, that is not the most important thing in a story. The most important thing in a story is the expression of themes through those events and the characters who are undergoing those events. Like,
thank you.
That is the most important part of any story in any medium. It's not like, if I said, okay, let's recap real quick the Suicide Squad movie's plot. A bunch of criminals are sent to an island to recover some information for the U.S. government that they want to hide. They find out that the U.S. was experimenting on an alien. The alien breaks free and kills a whole bunch of people, and the squad manages to stop them. That's boring. Just recapping those things that happen is boring. But that's the plot.
A million other things that we've seen and read before.
That's the plot. The plot is a bone structure to keep your like story flowing in a direction. It is the thing that keeps the story from just being all over the damn place. But it's not the reason for the story. The reason for the story is to express some greater themes that connect to us, or to have some sort of entertainment value through comedy or action or these things. It's not about just finding out what plot point happens next. Like,
yeah, it's like you're reading my mind tonight. You keep hitting on pet peeves.
We're on the same page. We're on the same
with
page
media criticism lately.
Yeah.
This whole obsession with plot that I keep seeing from people is just, it's nuts.
It
matters to an extent. Like structurally, you need to know how to, hammer out a plot to drive a narrative. But filmmakers themselves will tell you, have been on record as saying, plot doesn't matter. Plot is the least important thing. It's what's around the plot that matters.
Yeah.
Ask any filmmaker worth their salt, they will sacrifice like plot logic.
Ask any storyteller. Every story has already been told. The only things that matter is in the telling of it.
A storyteller will sacrifice plot mechanics and plot logic for emotional payoff 99% of the time.
Yeah.
Because that's how stories are told.
It's why there's so many stories with plot holes that are still like some of the greatest stories ever told. It's like the fact that there are plot holes doesn't like plot holes only matter when there are such an egregious number of them and they are so distracting that they take away from the emotional impact. Like,
they completely break the logic or rules of the movie.
Yeah, but like so many great stories just have plot holes and people don't give a shit because why would they?
Yeah, and if you applied that kind of stringent, and that's another thing, plot hole culture, plot holes. It's like, shut up. Like, for one thing, you got to know what a plot hole is. A plot hole isn't something that you wanted explained that wasn't explained. A plot hole isn't a development you just didn't like. People use all of these things to mean plot hole that aren't plot holes. A plot hole is something that either breaks an already established rule of a narrative or completely undercuts everything that has come before it. Vampires burst into flames in the sunlight. And if you set that rule and then later see a vampire in sunlight not bursting the flames, that's a plot hole.
Yeah.
Like, not explaining why vampires burst in the flame in sunlight isn't a plot hole. But that's how people express what they think a plot hole is.
Yeah.
It's just ugh.
Yeah.
Plot holes don't matter most of the time.
That was our general film criticism, but the Suicide Squad is a great movie. I love it as well.
Okay. It's not a tongue-in-geek episode without a giant tangent or
with multiple tangents. That's what people come for anyway. Us just talking about the movie by itself is just the icing on the cake of us rambling about other shit.
I mean, that's why they chose the Captain America ending in Endgame that people bitch about. Like, oh, it broke the time travel rules. It's because they wanted the emotional payoff more than they cared about sticking to the complete rules of time travel.
Yeah, it's so much more important to see Steve Rogers as an old man handing over the shield to Falcon than it is to actually just follow the rules of like, oh, he's on a different timeline now. It's like, nobody gives a shit during that moment. You only give a shit afterwards when you start overthinking it.
Yes. Stamp of approval. Are we doing review or nerd ethics?
We're running long. Well, I don't know how long we're running because we had some technical issues.
Well, we started late, so we haven't been going for a full 2 hours yet.
Let's do the nerd ethics. It's the super obvious question here in this whole story. I feel like the most obvious ethical question: is there an ethical justification for the use of a Suicide Squad, aka forcing criminals to undergo dangerous, life-threatening situations in order to do something for the government or save lives?
Oh, God.
Because I fucking hate Waller. I do. But is there a justification to the idea of forcing people under threat of death to do something that supposedly benefits the greater good?
I mean, I think that's the subtext of the entire title.
Mm-hmm.
You know, comics and movies in general. Mm-hmm. It wants you to ask that question because here we have these characters. Some of them are completely irredeemable, but some of them aren't, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it wants you to be like, is this right? I'm like, can we justify this? And I don't think it has an answer. I don't think it's supposed to have an answer. Well, I mean, that's a loaded topic.
It is, and I think it's because we've talked about this a few times now. The underlying like real world implications of this with like our actual prison system and how we literally have in the real world slave labor through the prison system in America. Like, it's literally written into the Constitution, 13th Amendment of the Constitution, that slave labor is still okay if done with prisoners. So this just pushes this to the extreme of, like, not only slave labor, but slave labor that threatens lives and is done under threat of death. I can't think of a way to justify that. Like, you can make the argument, especially in this universe, where there are other superheroes, really the only reason for the Suicide Squad to exist is so that those other heroes don't have to get their hands dirty and do a job that would make them look bad, or that they may not even agree to because this is being run by the government. I don't think you can justify this because it's such like a shady, like, government control sort of thing. It's not like, oh, Amanda Waller was doing this to protect people, or really there's like the government would want to do this for a justifiable reason. Like, the only reason this would ever happen in that world or in the real world is if there was something horrible going down that the government wanted to hide and keep quiet.
Yeah, because of the real world implications that all these fucking nerd ethics that you bring up have.
That's the whole point of nerd ethics, is to consider the ethical ramifications of these fantasy worlds that we explore.
There's the real world ongoing, you know, conversation of our prison system.
It's fucked.
Being fucked, being inhumane, and then you have the people like, oh, the criminals, why should it be humane, and da 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 da. we could go down a huge rabbit hole about rehabilitation and how prison doesn't fucking actually help anybody.
Nope.
It just makes the situation and the people worse.
It costs us money, and it doesn't help anyone.
With the Suicide Squad, like, it's the illusion of choice.
Mm-hmm.
Because at first it's like, oh, you help us do this thing, you get 20 years taken off your sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And each mission you accomplish, you get more taken off your sentence. But it's not really a choice because they have a bomb implanted in their neck that'll explode if they go off mission.
And even if they don't agree to it, even if they don't agree to join the Suicide Squad, Amanda Waller forces them in by threatening their children and loved ones and everything. So it's like...
We'll just manipulate you into doing it if she really wants you.
Yeah.
That's why I love her character so much, is she's so unique in the DC universe because... in the comics, she's this heavyset black woman, and of course, she's a black woman in the movies. Just in a universe that's colorful, muscle-bound, capes and costumes and stuff, she's this hard ass, and like she has her own moral code. Of course, like she's doing what she's doing, kind of in a peacemakery way. Like she will do anything that it takes to save the world.
Oh, in this movie, Peacemaker is very much like the hand of Waller. Like, that is how I would describe him. Like, he is the acting force for her.
Do you know the origin of Batman Beyond?
Not really. I need to watch Batman Beyond.
You actually don't learn the origin in Batman Beyond. You learn it in Justice League Unlimited. Oh. But Terry McGinnis is the Batman in Batman Beyond. And the whole series, you think he's just Terry McGinnis. And a lot of people don't like the origin, but I like it because of what it does with Waller. Mm-hmm. In the episode Epilogue in Justice League Unlimited, Waller reveals that she cloned Bruce Wayne, and Terry is the clone because the world needs a Batman. And I'm like, that's the most fucking Amanda Waller shit that is ever Amanda Waller. Like, from a character perspective, I can see how that might undermine who Terry McGinnis, who you thought he was throughout Batman Beyond. But as a piece of lore building, I think it's brilliant. I love reading the shit she's going to pull out of her ass to justify doing what she's doing.
Yeah.
And like she says it in this movie, she's like, you have no idea what I will do,
Right.
To complete the mission, to save the world, to, da-da-da-da-da.
So I guess our answer is no.
Yeah.
No justification. No justification for this shit.
It's cool because Batman in the comics, there's this famous cover of one of the Suicide Squad issues. It's just Amanda Waller, and she's like running up on Batman. She's pointing her finger in his face, and he's like backed up, all scared. Mm-hmm. It's really famous cover because like you don't see Batman in that compromised position. He hates the Suicide Squad because he's like, hey, wait a second, like they can't do this. I do this. Like they don't like. This isn't right. They're criminals. And like Amanda Waller's like, hey, wait a second. We have government permission to do this. You're the vigilante, And like, he's just like, fuck, she's right. He just like leaves.
I'm rich. The rules don't apply to me.
Anyway, read the Suicide Squad comics if
there's our rec.
If you enjoy this review.
I actually need to read some. I don't think I've ever read one of their comics. I've seen like pages and stuff from them online, but I've never actually read any of the runs. Now that you've told me that this particular team doesn't exist in the comics, that makes me sad.
But time
for review?
Let's do it.
All right. This one has, on Rotten Tomatoes, 91% critic reviews and 84% audience reviews. Before I get into specifics, I do want to talk about some of the common things I saw. A lot of people were talking about how they didn't expect or were upset by so much vulgar language and violence in this film. And I think this was a lot of just like parents who saw, it's a superhero movie and decided to take their kids to this, even though it had an R rating. And then they suddenly realized like, this isn't a movie for kids. And instead of like being like, I really should check the rating, they're just like, man, this movie is awful and horrible, and it really shouldn't be this. It's such an awful thing. It's like,
it's a tale as old as time. Just stupid, brain dead parents not paying attention.
Know what you're getting into whenever
it has the word suicide in the title for one thing.
That's one thing. And two, we've had the rating system forever. You should know what an R rating means by now. It means it's not suitable for children. It means it's going to be very violent or sexual or vulgar or something that is inappropriate.
All three.
Yeah. Another thing that I saw as a very sort of common thread is that people were sort of like, they didn't like Starro. They thought the monster was too silly, the giant starfish monster at the end. And I guess that's just sort of indicative of
it's a taste thing.
Yeah, it's a taste thing, and it's sort of indicative of how superhero movies have been toned down to appeal to broader audiences. Like, I get it. Like, it's not going to appeal to everyone for the big bad at the end to be a giant starfish that walks around all floppy and releases other smaller starfish. But,
that's so great!
Yeah, as a comic book fan, I love it because that kind of wacky shit is just so comic book, and it's great to see it played out on the big screen. Yeah, so let's get into some specific reviews. This is funny. I got 2 back-to-back here that I'm going to read off. The first one is from Clifford, and he says, "It's worth seeing John Cena die. 5 out of 5 stars." And this is immediately followed by Gene, who says, "Didn't like seeing John Cena dying. Loved seeing him in the recovery at the end. 4.5 out of 5 stars." So on one hand, you have someone who really fucking hates John Cena and loved watching him die. And then someone else who got upset at seeing John Cena die. So that just cracked me up. We've already talked about it, but I think John Cena is great here.
He is. Like,
I did not expect this kind of performance out of him.
The best thing I can say, and this is high praise indeed, is that I forgot I was watching John Cena.
Yeah, that is high praise.
Like, I thought he was fun in his other roles that I've seen him in, but it was still always just like, there's John Cena. With this, he completely sheds that.
It's interesting that we've reached a point where like ex-athletes and celebrity athletes have become actors in a way that isn't just like shit, you know? Because there's a lot
of them too.
There's a lot of like good actors who were celebrity athletes. Like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is a good actor. He's in a lot of shit.
Dave Bautista.
Yeah, Dave Bautista does a fantastic job as Drac in the Guardians movies. Like, it's interesting that we're seeing actual acting talent from these people, because for the longest time, it was like, you put like an athlete of some kind into a movie just for the celebrity face value, like in Space Jam. Like, they did it with Michael Jordan, they did it with LeBron James, and it's like, they clearly aren't actors, they clearly aren't meant to for this, but we're seeing actual actors.
Speaking of John Cena, I love lowbrow humor.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care who knows it. And every time I see people like, oh, dick and fart jokes, the lowest of the low, I'm like, I don't care. It's fucking funny. The part where Bloodsport shoots King Shark because he's about to eat Ratcatcher, and John Cena comes running up in his tiny whities.
Yeah.
And you can just tell that they like put he's just got this giant fucking package.
It was funny.
They don't mention it or anything. He just has this giant fucking package in these tiny whities.
Yeah. It was pretty great.
Juvenile humor. I love it. Well executed juvenile humor, I should say.
This next review is from Chad O. Chad says, "Because of the high ratings, I was expecting more like the caliber of Guardians of the Galaxy, or at least entertained like the first one." I'm going to stop you there, Chad. I'm going to stop you there.
Oh, Chad.
What about the first movie did you really like that this one didn't provide for you?
Chad, you're not being much of a Chad right now with this review.
Was it Killer Croc? Was he your favorite? He was there. He was present in the film. He was in the movie. But he says, "Nope, fell short. Characters unengaging with the exception of Harley and a few good action scenes. The main Starfish villain 2 added an unrealistic plot. It never gained momentum with the characters and the storyline. Bummer. 2 out of 5 stars.
Whatever. It's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody, but I don't understand how you can watch the first Suicide Squad movie and like it more than this one, specifically when one of your criticisms is that like the characters in this one are unengaging. The first Suicide Squad movie, it has all these characters and nothing about them matters. Like,
not really. No,
I don't remember anything about most of the characters. I remember there was a flame dude whose power was that like he could burn things, and he accidentally burned his family. And that's like, okay, sort of tragic. And then Deadshot had like his daughter or whatever that he loved. And then Harley Quinn was upset with her breakup with the Joker. And like, that's it. None of the other characters had motives or reasons to be there. They were just there.
What I think it is, and I do not mean this to be judgmental, I really don't, is it goes back to just the movie being this outlandish fucking tone.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first one, people do like it. It does have fans.
It's weirdly serious.
It's weirdly, it's more palatable. It has a bunch of needle drops. There's all kinds of music in it, which wasn't supposed to be in the original version. Mm-hmm. So you have this huge pop and rock and hip hop soundtrack.
And this movie uses a lot of like pop music and stuff. It just better executed.
Yeah, and it's just it's a more palatable movie. It was cut down to PG-13, and it has this kind of predictable sort of narrative, beat to beat to beat. But this one, it's bigger, it's weirder, it's very violent, it's vulgar, so I just think the weirdness of it, some people just won't take to.
Yeah.
I mean, because like when you said, like we've been talking about how it embraces comic books being comic books,
yeah,
and so many other movies tone it down. Like just look at Avengers, like just look at Infinity War and Endgame. I mean, those movies are crazy. It's about a big purple alien that comes and conquers, but at the same time, it also tones that down because they make Thanos a much more. He's not generic, but his motivation is much more.
It's grounded. In the comics, his motivation is that he's in love with death, and he wants to kill everyone to prove his love for her. It's
That's
this weird,
cool.
It's this weird Shakespearean sort of thing. In the movie, they make it like, I want to save the universe by, culling the herd.
He's just a Bond villain, but on a cosmic scale.
Yeah.
Where in the comics, it's a comic booky motive.
Yeah.
And I love Thanos in the MCU, but there's this part of me that really wishes they would have just went for the gold.
Yeah.
And had him try to court literal death.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been so fucking cool.
Would have been wild.
But like that sort of groundedness isn't here in this movie.
No.
Because there's a giant fucking mind controlling starfish.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess that's part of it. It's okay, Chad, that we disagree. Let's find one that's a little more different. Oh, here's a quick one. John W. says, big, loud, gross, and vulgar. Loved nearly every second of it. So much fun. 4 out of 5 stars.
This bump.
Yeah, we agree, John. I think it got a little too much for me in terms of the gross body horror shit, but like, yeah, it's cool. This one's from Sandra G. I'm a little worried about Sandra. She says, my kids and I loved it. Can't wait for the next one. 5 out of 5 stars. And she put a little smiley face in there.
Her kids could be 16. Her kids could be...
I hope so.
25. Her kids could be 5.
I am not someone who is like, oh, kids need to be sheltered from shit or whatever.
Oh, no. Me neither.
I'm not. But I do think there is a measure of like, they have these ratings for a reason. You should, like, if your kid's like 16 or whatever, yeah, it's fine to show them this movie. Like, they've probably watched Rick and Morty and Invincible and shit anyway, and they probably know about all this horrific, like, horror and violent shit and, like, this irreverent sort of, like, dark comedy. Like, they're probably familiar with this. But if your kid's like fucking 8 or whatever, don't take them to see the Suicide Squad. You're gonna give them a complex.
Yeah, like, it's like, my whole thing is just know your kid,
Yeah.
I mean, I have a very lax opinion about this because I saw so many movies that I shouldn't have as a young kid.
Yeah.
And, like, I love that about, my upbringing with movies is like, I saw so many things I should have seen as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I'm fine!
I'm fine!
But, and the reason I think that I was allowed to is because my parents saw that, aside from Jaws, nothing like really bothered me in a way that gave me nightmares or like disturbed me too much. So, hey, he can handle this. So I was allowed to see like R-rated stuff before the age of 10 sometimes.
Yeah.
I think it's all about knowing your kid. If you think your 10-year-old can handle seeing the Suicide Squad, okay, that's your prerogative. Go ahead. But
yeah,
it's Generally, no, not kid-friendly. Trust me. Trust us.
Yeah, it's not. Here's a weird sort of tangent. I don't really have such a problem with, like, the violence and even, like, the sexual content and stuff in terms of, like, being kid-unfriendly. Like, kids... there's such fucking discussion about movies and video games making kids violent, and that's the reason for shootings and whatnot, but not getting into that. Not getting into that discussion. Fuck that. But I do think there is a measure of, with this sort of darker and adult comedy in general, you need to be aware of the messages being sent to your kid and what they think is funny.
It meant,
yeah, because a lot of times with these darker comedies and stuff, I don't think with this one in particular, but a lot of times what comes off as funny is just being mean to people, and that's not something you want to teach your children. Like, I don't think kids should be watching shows like Family Guy and stuff at an early age, and I know a lot of more kids probably watch Family Guy than will watch The Suicide Squad, because, like, the humor there is built on the idea of just being mean to people is funny, and that's a bad message to teach an impressionable young mind.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah, and I don't think it's not like an aesthetic thing. It's not like body horror and shit and like sexual content can't be shown to kids. It's a thematic thing. It's like you need to know what themes are being expressed to an impressionable young mind.
And I also think that people perpetually don't give kids benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Like, if the kid is well adjusted and they're being raised properly, you know, they're able to put things into context. Yeah. Like, if they see something scary and it scares them, you know, they could be like, oh, yeah, but it's just a movie. Or if they see something like disturbing or like mean-spirited, they could still rationalize, oh, it's just this, it's just that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of course, that's not universal. Of course. Kids are impressionable. Media can make an impression that's not positive. But I think a lot of the time, kids know how to process stuff better than we give them credit for.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, kids are more understanding. And media can help kids to process things more. You know, good stories can help kids process complex ideas in a more simplified way. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is that be careful with the media you show your kids, not because, like, kids don't need to be looking at violence or sexual stuff, but, like, media will form the way that your child thinks about the world around them. And just be understanding of, like, what messages are being shown there.
Yeah, and talk to them, you know?
Yeah. Discuss these things. Media is important. You know, comics are important. Television's important. Video games are important. They mean things to your kid. They wouldn't spend so many hours enjoying them if they weren't important. This one's from Space Ghost. I don't know if it's coast to coast or not, but this is Space Ghost. Space Ghost says, poor writing, poor cinematography, depth of character were shallow, 2 out of 5 stars. Forget the poor writing and depth of character shit. We've talked about that before. I'm going to talk about their criticism of poor cinematography here. There are some really cool shots in this movie. Like, yeah, and just a couple of the ones I love, like the opening shot with Savant, like where you see him in like the reflection of the water, and it slowly comes up, and like the whole time he's just like tossing this ball around his prison cell. That's a cool shot. It really like shows the sort of like, and it's great because like in the pool you just see his face and like the sky because it's reflecting the sky above him. So you go from this moment of freedom to moving up to him in a jail cell. Like that's a really clever shot. Then there's like the shot when Flag and Peacemaker are fighting. That's all done in the reflection of his helmet.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that. That's one of my favorite shots of the whole movie because it was another previous joke that had substance to it. Mm-hmm. They make fun of his helmet looking like a toilet seat. And he's like, it's not a toilet seat, it's a beacon of freedom. And then here we have the villain reveal. He's fighting to the death with Flag, and their fight's reflected in his helmet. Here's his beacon of liberty that he just talked about. It's a perversion. It's bullshit. You know, that's the reason the fight's reflected in the helmet.
And it's such a great way to
visually represent that. Like,
it's such a cool way to show an action scene, because action scenes so often are just these blurry sort of shaky cam shots. And here you get like one steady shot of it like slowly revolving around this helmet and seeing them fighting in the reflection of it. It's great.
Yeah, that's like the epitome of good cinematography. Like, I don't like reviews like this that have these loaded criticisms that are supposed to sound like they're substantive, but they're not at all. These are just empty criticisms. He's not explaining why the cinematography is bad or why the writing is bad. He's just saying it is. So, whatever.
This one's going to piss you off, too. It's also confusing. This is from Eric H. Eric says, horrible movie. It's so bad I had to write my first review. Get this liberal crap out of movies. 0.5 out of 5 stars.
Oh, no.
I know. Okay. I know that we talked about some of the more, like, political themes in here, like the prison system stuff and foreign interference with American military. Those themes are in here for sure. I just don't know if Eric, and I hate to be presumptive, I don't know if Eric is smart enough to have picked up on those themes to criticize them in the first place.
No, it's with when we do review, we like to soften the blow and understand perspectives. But with this shit, with this fucking liberal, but like I'm not gonna go soft on these. Like, fuck you. I hate to make this too political, but this growing
that bridge.
This growing wave of these freaking chuds that see like liberal and lefty boogeyman in everything now, and like take it personally and see it as an attack. Like, grow the fuck up.
What does liberal even mean in this context, any context?
What is when?
There's no description of what themes or elements he didn't like. So it's like, I don't know what you're criticizing.
There's this growing wave of fucking people that just like bitch about everything being woke and liberal now.
My pizza was too hot. The fucking liberals. It's like
what exactly about this? And when they bitch about things being too SJW or liberal, it's because the agenda. What agenda? Like what specifically about this movie? Because it had a couple of women in it. Like, is that your problem that had prominent and positive roles?
There are
because the lead character was a black man. Like, what's your problem
that
here?
Bullshit, then fuck off. But like, there are specific messages in here with political undertones that you could talk about. That's what I'm saying. Is like, I don't think he was smart enough to catch those in the first.
And
place.
I'm sorry, but if you're triggered by liberal and left and progressive themes in movies, stop watching movies, because movies have historically leaned left. Yeah. It's always been the case.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you started watching movies yesterday or 30 years ago, but
comic books as well.
You have comic books as well. You have brain worms. Shut up.
Yeah.
Go get the brain worms taken care of and then come back.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a bad one to end on. Let me find a better, more uplifting one to end with. Here's one from Gavin, and I think Gavin's being a troll, but I kind of love it. Gavin says, great movie, fun for kids, 5 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, that's definitely a little... It's an innocent troll comment.
It's an innocent troll. He's pissing off some person who's going to take their kids to go see it and not see the R rating, but it is a fun movie. All right, any final notes?
Oh, God, I think I exhausted my final notes.
Yeah, this has been a long one.
I love it. I've seen it twice now. The more I think about it, the more I find to enjoy. It's such a refreshing movie. It's so refreshing in the age of blockbusters that we're in. It usurped Godzilla vs. Kong as my favorite blockbuster of the year so far.
High praise.
Which I didn't think would happen. But
Godzilla vs. Kong, as fun as it is, it's really more of like a for fun sort of movie. Like, it has some good character with Kong that's like makes you feel for Kong, but it's not really got any depth to it beyond just like, hey, big monsters are fighting, and that's fine. That's what the movie is. It's for big monsters fighting. This movie has that sort of enjoyability tagged on with actual emotional depth and a great adaptation of comics books superhero stories on top of it.
Yep.
Well, Tyler hates numbers for a reason I'm not clever enough to come up with right now, but I'm proud to give the Suicide Squad, Tongue and Geek's first ever 6 out of 9 dead members of Task Force X Diversion Squad. God rest their souls.
Clever rating. I enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Because that's how many of them died out of that team Weasel, Harley Quinn, and Flag survived. The rest of them, all 6 of those.
Weasel. I'm so happy.
I'm surprised they just fucking threw away Captain Boomerang. Not that, like, this movie really has any respect for the first movie, as it doesn't deserve the respect, but, like...
that's a big gripe with some fans, because Captain Boomerang is a pretty prominent character in the comics, not just in the Suicide Squad comics, but he's a main villain of the Flash. So... even people who love the movie are like, why the fuck did they kill Captain Boomerang? Like, he's like a big deal. He had so much potential. And like, yeah, I can kind of see that. I kind of agree, but I'm not like mad about it. And I was just like, I liked him as a character. It's kind of a bummer that he died, but
yeah. Anyway, this is the outro. We've got to find a better way to end this show. I like your little jingle, but it's so awkward to just sing it at the end.
Well, you gotta have more This is the outro. This is the outro. Hope you like the show, because this is the outro.
Okay, bye.